We are live downtown on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube. So how you doing this Thursday morning? We're going to have a high of 25 degrees today, mix of sun and cloud. We do have a chance of showers this afternoon, a 60% chance, and a risk of a thunderstorm. So we'll see how the day goes. But right now in downtown Winnipeg, we're pretty much just partly cloudy. Over in Brandon today, you are going to be mainly cloudy, a chance of showers for you as well, and a high of 24. And the humidexes are going to make it feel a little sticky everywhere today. Thompson, though, not so much, a high of 20, mix of sun and cloud, and a 30% chance of showers late this morning for you. Let's say hello to the team. Abby Adiyami's behind the controls. Hi, Abby. Abby covers the forecast on air and is our technical producer. Good morning to Mr. Corey Funk, who directs the program and will be covering the commute on air. And a good morning to Brad Lillies and to Dylan Longhurst, who's behind the controls of YouTube this morning. Hi, Dylan. All right, let's go to our news center. 2 minutes to 6 o'clock. Heather Wells has been busy already, and she's here with headlines.
Good morning. Well, the Manitoba government is expected to release more details today into its plan to search a landfill for women's remains. The government will lay out the plan to search Prairie Green landfill in a technical briefing. The remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron are believed to be there. The women are victims of an admitted serial killer. A Winnipeg teen is getting set to take his talents across the border to play ultimate frisbee, and he's doing it on an athletic scholarship. Cale Peterson is heading to Davenport University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He says it's nice to see ultimate being treated as an actual sport. We're going to hear more coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, in the program today, in the first hour of the show, NATO Secretary General visits Ottawa with a message of keeping the alliance strong in the face of new relationships by authoritarian countries. We're going to have a conversation with an international affairs expert in the first hour of the show about that. Also, today, specifically at 3:50 this afternoon. Thank you, Abby. We're going to talk to a climatologist for a look at summer's arrival, and we're going to look at the summer forecast, so stay tuned for that. A little bit later, some inner-city community groups are worried about a funding cut, and after 21 years with the city, the CAO has resigned. We're going to seek some clarity this morning in our monthly interview with Mayor Scott Gillingham. He will join us live in studio at about 7:45. Stay right here.
Learn the Cayuga language, which is spoken fluently by only 21 people. She'll be here to tell you about the power of creating a world where everybody, young and old, speaks the language fluently.
Performance is such a beautiful tool to integrate into language revitalization.
That's coming up on Q, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. An out-of-control wildfire, a late-night evacuation order, and a harrowing drive to safety. It has been a long night for the people of Churchill Falls. They had to leave home at a moment's notice as flames approached their community. Terry Griffin is one of them.
So I had a bag that was ready to go type of thing, and I just grabbed the bag and off we went. It was that fast. Get your things together and get moving.
The CBC's Peter Cowan is tracking developments.
The fire has been burning for days just west of Churchill Falls, but last night officials were worried. Strong winds pushed the flames to within just a few kilometers of the town, and it was growing fast. So they gave the order to leave town. More than 700 people were forced to load up whatever they could in just a few minutes and drive east 3 hours to Happy Valley Goose Bay. 12-year-old Elizabeth Power was worried.
I was shaking when we had, she said to go pack, and I was shaking. I was like, what's gonna happen? I'm still scared.
Churchill Falls is a company town run by Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. A small team has stayed behind to keep the massive hydroelectric plant running and keep the lights on, not just in Labrador, but also in Quebec. The power plant provides about 15% of that province's power. There's only one highway in and out of town, so a long line of cars snake their way towards Happy Valley Goose Bay. That's where the local YMCA gym quickly became the center to greet people like Susan Chislett. She says it was hard to leave.
We've created a home. My husband said coming down, we're driving away from everything we ever worked for. And I said, yeah, but we're here, so we can always rebuild.
We didn't know anyone here. We had nowhere to go. We reached Salvation Army. They took us in. We were tired, but they welcomed us.
How much do you remember about that moment?
That day, We are very depressed. We are tired. We spent a whole night at the train station.
What was that night in the train station like with your two little kids in the middle of Winnipeg in November?
Of death.
The timing of the Hajj is set by the lunar calendar. Right now, its start date is moving closer to winter, but by the 2040s, it will coincide with peak summer in Saudi Arabia. Canada claims to be a climate leader, but advocates say it could be doing more as a major oil and gas producer. An independent analysis reveals the industry's exports could potentially produce more emissions than all of Canada. Jilla Bernstein has the story.
Why would Canadians trust you?
A testy exchange earlier this month at a parliamentary committee on sustainable development and the environment. NDP MP Laurel Collins questioned Cenovus oil and gas CEO John McKenzie.
All our emissions actually peaked in 2017, down to
Emissions in the oil and gas sector have continued to rise year after year.
According to the federal government, oil and gas emissions are up more than 80% since 1990. And that's only domestic emissions from activities like drilling and refinement. Canada and other major producers don't count emissions from exported oil and gas. But the international research project Climate Action Tracker does. It estimates Canada's oil and gas exports may increasingly outweigh its domestic emissions. If all of Canada's oil and gas exports were burned in 2022, they would have produced more than 900 megatons of carbon dioxide. That's more than the entire country's emissions that year, and more than 4 times the emissions reported for the oil and gas sector. The true scope of exported emissions could be higher or lower, depending on the final use of those products.
We're in a closed system.
Jessica Kelly is a senior policy advisor in Winnipeg with the International Institute for Sustainable Development.
You can't play a shell game with emissions. The climate knows the score.
The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers said in an email that progress on emissions is a core priority. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
In Sweden, a former Syrian army general accused of war crimes has been acquitted. Brigadier General Mohammed Hamo now lives in Sweden. He was accused of aiding and abetting crimes against international law. Swedish prosecutors alleged Hamo facilitated attacks on military and civilian targets in 2012. This case marked the first time a senior Syrian military figure faced trial in a European court for human rights violations. He was acquitted this morning. It is not clear how many Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or wounded since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. That was nearly 2.5 years ago. But the number is in the tens of thousands. CBC News got exclusive access to a medical evacuation team treating wounded soldiers. As Briar Stewart tells us, some of the wounded were conscripted by law, and they only lasted a few days on the front line.
One by one, the soldiers arrive bloodied and bandaged. Some are brought on stretchers to a pickup point in southeastern Ukraine, like a 39-year-old who tells us his military call sign is Wi-Fi. He was an IT specialist before he was conscripted. After Ukraine passed its new mobilization law in April, he was only on the front for 2 days when he came under fire by Russian artillery, shrapnel piercing both of his legs.
How difficult was it for you to leave the trench and to get evacuated?
Very difficult.
He said the tourniquets on his limbs made it hard for him to crawl out of the trench. He had to be carried out to a vehicle and then transferred to this medical evacuation bus along with 25 other men. The bus, which transfers the soldiers to the hospital, is run by a volunteer group called Hospitalers. One of the combat medics, who goes by the call sign Rudy, says soldiers are often desperate to hear whether they will need their limbs amputated. On this day, she says one wanted to call his family. Like others CBC News spoke with, he was a brand new soldier. He was mobilized and only lasted on the front line for a few days before being seriously injured. Briar Stewart, CBC News, southeastern Ukraine.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will publicly apologize to First Nations children and their families for the discrimination they faced from the federal government's child welfare policies. The official apology would fulfill one of the government's commitments in a recently finalized $23 billion settlement agreement. The settlement will compensate First Nations people who experienced racial discrimination through Ottawa's chronic underfunding of on-reserve family services. There are plenty of reports of hybrid bears in the Northwest Territories. Some people call them growler bears. Others call them pizzlies. And although the reports are common, these hybrid bears are actually quite rare. The CBC's Lenny Lambrink takes us through the latest research.
For whatever reason, she seemed to like grizzly bears.
Steve Barlick is a wildlife manager for the government of the Northwest Territories. He's talking about a female polar bear who mated with 2 grizzlies and mothered 4 hybrid cubs.
And then those grizzly bears mated with the offspring, and kind of that's how we ended up with some of the second generation hybrid bears.
Evan Richardson, a polar bear scientist with the federal government, saw them during a monitoring flight 10 years ago.
When we turned that corner into that bay and saw this kind of creamy colored polar bear with 3 little chocolate cubs, you almost had to rub your eyes.
Scientists have known since 2017 8 hybrid bears in the Western Arctic belonged to the same family. What they didn't know was how rare they are.
I would have expected there to be more.
Ruth Rivkin, a University of Manitoba researcher, helped develop a new genetic sequencing chip to identify hybrid bears. Scientists used it on samples from more than 800 bears in Canada, Alaska, and Greenland. The only hybrids they found, that same family of bears in the NWT.
What that means is that hybridization is quite rare.
Rivkin says the Western Arctic is where hybridization is most likely to happen. It's one of the few places in the world where grizzly and polar bear habitats are starting to overlap due to climate change. She expects there will be more hybrids in the future. Minnie Lambrink, CBC News, Yellowknife.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Well, good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. Welcome to the first day of summer. It's arriving officially later this afternoon. We've got partly cloudy sky down in Winnipeg this morning. A high of 25. Thanks for joining us on CBC 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube. We'll get into those current conditions and temperatures in just a moment with Abby Adiyemi. Well, this hour on the program, speaking of summer, how are you going to keep the kids off the iPad or the Xbox this year? We'll hear a conversation about that. Also, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was in Ottawa yesterday, as we've been hearing, with a message about the continued relevance of the alliance in the face of Russia's destabilizing war in Ukraine, and also its new cooperation treaty with North Korea. So we're going to hear all about that with some deeper analysis this hour. And then at 10 to 7, we will have on a climatologist for a look at this summer's weather forecast. Obviously, there's going to be lots of concern in it, as we've been hearing about the extreme heat across the country and the world. So stay tuned. That's just before 7 for you. Right now, let's get to local news headlines with Heather Wells.
Good morning. Well, Manitoba's largest First Nation is concerned apartment and condo buildings going up at the Forks could damage archaeological evidence at the historic site. Mike Sutherland at Peguis First Nation wants Peguis and others included in a formal consultation process. He says they also want monitors from Peguis present during construction in case anything is discovered. And people in Point Douglas say they are fed up with piles of rubble in their neighborhood. It's been 16 months since fire destroyed 3 businesses on Main Street. And since then, 2 of those properties have been cleaned up, but a pile of rubble remains where Surplus Direct once stood. Marshall Reeb lives across the back lane from the property. He says people have even started dumping their garbage on top of the rubble. He calls it garbage upon garbage. We're going to hear more coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
All right. Thank you very much, Heather Walls.
You're welcome.
Let's get into the forecast, but not before we show the YouTube folks something very special. We got in this awesome conversation. Look at those shoes.
Can you describe the inner lane?
So the radio audience doesn't know what we're talking about, so let me back up here. So yesterday we started talking about Abby and his fabulous collection of footwear and how he sits on the couch and he cleans them meticulously, and we're always in awe of Abby's beautiful runners. He collects Converse. He's holding one up for the YouTube audience. It's a black high top, his fave. Yesterday you said the inside reminded you of the first day of summer.
Yeah, and this is what it's going to look like today. So
the interior of the black runners is bright, beautiful orange.
Orange, and that's what we're expecting today. Right now, 15 in the city. The solstice is here. It's going to come at 3:50 this afternoon. And after today, yes, the sad news is we're beginning to lose daylight, but we need to enjoy it for now. We're actually going to be warming up slightly above normal. The high for today, 25 in Winnipeg. Yes, it's the first official day of summer, the longest day of the year. For this day, we should be expecting a mix of sun and clouds throughout the day, and there's a high chance of showers this afternoon, coming with a risk of thunderstorm also. It will become breezy as the wind shifts to the south this morning into the lunch hour period, and we're touching a high of 25. Tonight, partly cloudy, chances of showers again in the evening, and then we're just going to dip to 13. But right now, we've got a few clouds out there. It's 15 in the city. It's going to be a beautiful day. We're going to be starting with a mix of sun and clouds, reminding me of the inner layer of my
shoe.
And then, just that good chance of showers, and we're going to touch 25 today.
All right, thanks, Abby.
You're welcome.
I'll let you put your runner back on now. All right, what are you doing, Corey?
These are my Blundstones. That
Wow.
are 2 years old, and they reflect what the traffic is like out there. Overall, pretty smooth, but lots of areas in need of repair as well. So look out for construction.
Clever.
Yes.
Well worn.
Yeah, well worn.
They've been repaved a few times.
Exactly. Maybe a little smelly in places.
Awesome, which is great because we're in a sealed studio.
Yeah, exactly. But if you do see something going on out there, give me a call on the CBC commuter line. Let me know what you're seeing if you're walking, biking, driving. I would love to hear from you. 204-788-3093.
Don't worry, everyone. I'm going to keep my shoes on. Next on the show, as summer break approaches, there's a big question on a lot of parents' minds. How do you keep kids busy without the use of screens? Angela Taylor is a mental health and accessibility expert and founder and CEO of Inspire Community Outreach here in Winnipeg. Now, she had this conversation with Up to Speed yesterday with Faith Fundal and going over some tips on how to navigate summer screen time.
Hi, Angela.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. What about you when you think about just how hard it is to keep kids off their screens? Is it hard? Is it easy? What's your take?
Well, I know for a fact it's hard, and it's hard for a lot of people. And so I like to sprinkle a lot of compassion on that. And even when I'm talking to my own kids, tell them, like, screens are made to be addictive. That's why so many people are on them. And, neurodivergent or sensitive brains are even more sticky on screens. So, hey, kiddo, if you're needing some help to unstick from there and plan something else really fun, well, we can do that too.
That empathetic approach it also includes validating why someone might want to use their screens. Why do you think it's important to do both of those things, to provide the empathy, but also to help explain why screen time needs to be regulated and what impact it might have on people?
I think there's a value in it's not me against you. It's this togetherness, collaboration. Because as soon as you're introduced, listen to my rules and shame and guilt, then everybody's feeling kind of yucky. And then the brain is going to feel like I need more dopamine or more screens, and I'm not going to know how to get my needs met. So then big challenging behaviors can sometimes happen.
I know some folks might use movies or TV shows as a way to give themselves a break, especially for young kids. Do you think that's something parents or guardians should feel bad about doing?
I would say no. A lot of sensitive brains, including my own and my own children, we use screens as a regulation or calming tool. It's a way that we can use, like, empower ourselves to feel calmer in the moment, sometimes curling up and watching a movie together with some snacks on Friday night, ordering in something feels like such a cherished time. So I think depending on what's best for each family, they're going to decide what's going to work best for them. And there's lots of ways to make screens a tool to work for you.
Okay, and talk more about the way that you can use screens as a tool. What immediately comes up for you?
I think using, like, wrapping it up in compassion and educating children, and that, like, minds are going to be sticky on it. And, I'm never going to keep it away from you, for example, but, we can make a plan to help it, feel more balanced. So if your mind is sticky and wants to spend 8 hours on there, well, that's a bummer, because now you missed out on maybe swimming. And, we have this gorgeous weather in Winnipeg and going to the beach together. So conversations like that where, we're coming up with solutions to make it kind of minimized and not the whole life, but maybe an addition to the life.
That's kind of the next level of seeing things, because it's really what you're describing is a big reframe, right? Without making it sound like, do what I say.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing is every child, every adult, every parent is doing the best we can. And I'll be honest, sometimes I need my kids to be on a screen. Mom needs to cook dinner. Mom wants to do this. And so could you please go on your screens for a time? I think a lot of families tend to feel guilty instead of just pouring on some compassion and saying, it's okay that this works for my family and I'm going to use it as a tool, which is what feels safe and good for me.
When you think about monitoring kids' use of screens, what sorts of things do you say to parents and guardians? How do they do it without it being sort of, the invasive standing behind you, watching you look at the screen kind of thing?
Absolutely. There's lots of tools that I support parents to, put into their homes and find what's the best fit for them. One is using an app. A lot of internet providers have an app you can use that monitors how much screen time and can even turn it off at a certain time of hour or time of day. Another thing is modeling. So am I going to be sticky on my phone or laptop all day, but then tell my kids to get off? They're going to be like, that's kind of hypocritical, Mom.
Right.
So me being the one that's leading, and if I'm feeling sticky on it, saying, you know what, my brain is really sticky on screen today. I'm going to do these things to find my joy and calm elsewhere and show them by doing. I find that extremely successful.
There may be families that decide to go completely screen-free this summer. What space, in terms of empathetic space, might exist if a family decides, nope, we're just going to go, we're no screen at all? How do you inject empathy in that?
I've actually had a few families that go permanently screen-free in their home all year long, and it is a transition. And so part of it is saying, you know what? I see that this is really hard for all of us, these screens, and it's causing some hard things for us that maybe doesn't feel safe and good. So I'm deciding for the family that screens are a no-go right now. So what else can we do as a family to help that feel safer and better? So for example, if you have an option between, having a screen all day and nothing, well, you're going to pick a screen. But if you have an option between a screen and going to St. Malo and minnow fishing, having a picnic and ice cream after, and seeing your best friends all day with all your favorite activities, that's an easier choice to pick St. Malo. And so this idea of collaboration, of really listening to our kids and valuing, I prefer this activity versus this activity, will really invest them into whatever thing is being done. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. There's going to be a transition for sure to go from lots of screens to less or none, but it can be done. And reminding our own brains and our kids' brains, you know what? Hard things are hard. And what can we do to help ourselves feel safer and better right now?
That's Angela Taylor, mental health and accessibility expert and founder and CEO of Inspire Community Outreach in Winnipeg. She was speaking there to Up to Speed host Faith Vandal. And now, because today is officially the first day of summer, arrives this afternoon, we are actually asking you to close your eyes and think, but don't overthink. What's your best summer memory? You can probably smell it. You can probably feel it if it involved warmth on your skin or sand in your toes. But what's your best summer memory? I bet it's not sitting with a screen. And believe me, I like my screens, but mine's not that either. So let us know, 788-3205.
For breaking news as it happens, stay with CBC News. For the latest updates and what it means for Canadians, stay with CBC News. When the biggest stories break, both at home and around the world, stay with CBC News.
6:22 a.m. is the time right now on your Thursday morning. It's 15. It's mostly cloudy, and people downtown seem to have hoods up and hands in pockets. So it could be just a little bit chilly feeling out there because of the cloud cover. We are heading to a high of 25 degrees, though, so it's going to be humid and sticky later today. Well, next on the program, the head of NATO was in Ottawa yesterday making the case for keeping the military organization strong in the face of new authoritarian alliances. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was speaking about a new military cooperation agreement specifically between Russia and North Korea. He underscored the importance of supporting Ukraine as it continues to fight off Russia since the full-scale invasion began. Now, for more, we're joined by Colin Robertson to talk about it, former Canadian diplomat and fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. Good morning.
Good to be with you again, Marcy.
So what specifically more, if you could elaborate, did Jens Stoltenberg have to say on this visit?
Well, it was a subtle pitch for more Canadian support for NATO. As you know, the NATO alliance has set a 2% target of GDP for spending, which we were to meet this year, and Canada currently stands at 1.37% of GDP. And in our defense update, which was tabled a month or so ago, we said we'd reach 1.75% by 2029, 2030, but we're not near 2%. Although yesterday, after his meetings with Defense Minister Blair and Treasury Board Secretary Nina Nand, both the Canadian ministers said that we've got big procurement projects, purchase of new submarines, the modernization of NORAD in the north, which NORAD, of course, is a binational alliance between Canada and the United States for defense of the continent, but it also has application for NATO, and so spending money up there would also count towards that 2% NATO target. And with the NATO NORAD modernization and with the new submarines, the minister said we will bypass the 2% quite easily. And I think that's true.
Stoltenberg spoke, as I just mentioned, Colin, about China and its military assistance to Russia. How are you reflecting on that?
Well, it's demonstrated that the Chinese are helping Russia evade sanctions. China's never signed on to the sanctions that the West applied to Russia after their invasion of Ukraine a couple of years ago. And of course, just before that invasion, President Putin had gone to China. It was just before the Beijing Olympics, and he and Xi Jinping signed a treaty of everlasting friendship. And China is, without doubt, providing support to Russia to wage its war in Ukraine, and its use of satellites for targeting Ukrainian electrical generation, which is shutting off the power and the lights in Ukraine, and providing sensors which are used in missiles to make them more precise in where they can land. And that's coming from China as well. So there's no doubt that China is helping Russia significantly in its war on Ukraine.
And what about Russia's ever closer ties with North Korea then?
Well, that's another piece in it. The North Koreans have been manufacturing shells that the Russians use for their bombing of Kharkiv and other Ukrainian cities, and they've basically run out of their own supplies. So they're now importing them from North Korea, which has a vast arsenal, because they're still in a state of truce in a sense with South Korea. That war which Canada participated in 1950, it ended with a truce, not a peace treaty. And the North Koreans, the Hermit Kingdom as we call it, have been building up their armaments ever since. They have both nuclear weapons and the capacity to send these missiles all the way to North America. And in fact, that's part of the deal, I think, with Russia, is to have technology from Russia helped them improve their targeting capacity for those nuclear missiles.
Before you go this morning, I want to take a moment here because Stoltenberg's actually leaving NATO. He's leaving the NATO alliance as leader in November. What do you think his legacy is? And do you have a thought on who might replace him already?
Sure. Well, he's served 10 years. He's done 2 terms. I think he's been very effective as NATO leader. He was Prime Minister of Norway, so he understands politics, and certainly I saw a demonstration of that yesterday at the speech when after he'd spoken, because he was heading out to go to Washington, he really did work the crowd, shook my hand and others, and he's personable, and he made the point at one point in his remarks that his mother had gone to McGill and that he'd gone to a Leonard Cohen concert in 2010 with his mom, and so he had this capacity, even though he's a bit austere Nordic, of establishing a rapport with an audience which was already inclined to like him. But what he's been able to do over the 10 years is increase the number of countries that actually meet that 2% target from 4 to 23 of the 33, and then NATO alliance has expanded most recently to include Sweden and Finland, and that was no easy chore because the Hungarians and the Turks were not initially in favor of that, but he was able to persuade them. He's worked quite quietly behind the scenes. He's let the Americans take the front seat because the Americans pay for half the alliance, and I think he's been the kind of leader you want in difficult times. Now, as to his successor, most likely going to be Mark Rutte, who's currently the caretaker prime minister in the Netherlands. He's been prime minister of a variety of coalitions in the Netherlands for the past 10 years. Centrist, Justin Trudeau likes him. He's good at managing, say, disparate coalitions, which is really what the NATO alliance is.
Thank you very much, Colin, for all the analysis today. Appreciate your time always.
Thanks, Marcy.
Colin Robertson is a fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute and former Canadian diplomat. We reached him this morning in Ottawa. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is CBC. Thanks so much for joining us on this Thursday morning. It is the first day of summer coming, and that'll be happening officially this afternoon. We've got some cloud cover, though, in Winnipeg this morning, so it's not feeling particularly summery yet, but it's actually going to be a little bit sticky and warm later. Well, coming up, we have business news. Crystal Ramlichan's going to join us via Zoom, as she does always, and daily on the program. Today, she's talking about population, Canada's population specifically, topping 41 million people in the first quarter of this year. We're going to discuss what effect that's going to potentially have on the economy. And then we're going to get a bit of a bigger look, speaking of summer, at what the forecast is going to look like for the next 3 months. You heard some of the headlines earlier this week globally about the concerns around heat in the world and across Canada as well. Also, just as an aside, their impact potentially on athletes at the Paris Games this year, which is a big concern. So we're going to be talking in the next half hour of the program about what exactly Environment Canada's 3-month summer forecast says as we head into, as mentioned, this first day officially of summer. Right now, though, your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. And the first day of summer also means the longest day of the year, more than 16 hours of daylight today. However, some cloud cover may block out the sun for a little bit of that. A mix of sun and clouds today. A good chance we'll see showers, maybe even a thunderstorm later today, and a high of 25. Manitoba's largest First Nation is concerned apartment and condo buildings going up at the Forks could damage archaeological evidence at the historic site. Mike Sutherland is Director of Consultation and Special Projects at Peguis First Nation. He wants Peguis and others to be included in a formal consultation process. Sutherland says they also want monitors from Peguis present during construction in case anything is discovered.
It has to be done properly with ceremony, and archaeological work has to be done there. Because if you unearth a village, if you unearth ancestors, teepee rings, or whatever it may be, a campsite, it's better to do it beforehand.
The Fork says an investigation in 2017 did not find many archaeologically significant artifacts at the housing site, but it says it welcomes ongoing conversations with Peguis. A pile of rubble where a Main Street business once stood has become a headache for people in Point Douglas. Marshall Weeb lives behind the former Surplus Direct store It was demolished after a fire in February of last year. He thinks the mess would have been dealt with by now in many other parts of the city.
We just want it cleaned up because I just feel that if this was in Sage Creek or White Ridge or any other area of the city, this wouldn't have lasted for even 24 hours, never mind 16 months.
Wiebe says he doesn't know who should be responsible for cleaning up the mess. The cleanup has been delayed while the property owner fights a provincial order to stop work over asbestos. Manitoba's government is expected to release more details today into its plan to search a landfill for the remains of 2 women. CBC's Ian Fraze reports.
The province will host a technical briefing about the landfill search later today. The government is expected to lay out in greater detail how it will search the Prairie Green landfill. The remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron are believed to be there. They are 2 victims of admitted serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky. Last week, the government announced the search would happen in 5 stages. In the coming weeks, workers will sift through one area of the landfill to understand the consistency of the material. They will then turn their focus to a targeted area where the remains are believed to be. If that's unsuccessful, Premier Wabkanu says the search area will expand. The Harris and Myron families have been demanding a landfill search for a year and a half. Ian Fraze, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And the 3 become 1. 3 credit unions have voted to merge: Assiniboine Credit Union, Case Financial Group, and Westoba Credit Union. The merger, which is being called Uniquely Manitoban, will be effective January 1st, 2025. It will create one of the largest credit unions in Manitoba and will be in the top 10 in Canada. A lawsuit is seeking billions of dollars for a failed plan to manufacture COVID-19 vaccine in Manitoba during the pandemic. Vera-Lynn Kubanek reports.
Alberta vaccine company Providence Therapeutics had a plan to produce tens of millions of doses of its COVID-19 vaccine in Manitoba. Former Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister announced in the depth of the pandemic the province would buy 2 million doses of the vaccine from Providence. In January 2021, Providence turned to an American company, Emergent Biosolutions, for commercial vaccine production at its Winnipeg facility. But the plan failed to proceed. Now Providence is suing Emergent Biosolutions for more than $3 billion. The lawsuit filed in a Winnipeg court this month alleges Emergent's Winnipeg facility could not produce the commercial volumes of the Providence COVID-19 vaccine. It alleges Emergent did not have reliable manufacturing capabilities and lacked capacity and equipment. Employees of Emergent were not properly trained, the lawsuit alleges, and there were not enough employees to carry out the work 24 hours a day. The allegations have not been tested in court, and both Providence and Emergent declined comment. Vera-Lynn Kubanek, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A Winnipeg teen will take his talents across the border to play ultimate frisbee. Cale Peterson is heading to Davenport University in Grand Rapids, Michigan on an athletic scholarship. Heidi Howes coached him at Calvin High School and says it's an opportunity that hasn't always existed.
You play for U of M, you go represent them at a national tournament, but you certainly aren't getting this opportunity where you're getting scholarship money and a way more of an opportunity to train and really have it be your focus.
Howes says the sport continues to gain steam locally and around the world. Talk about gaining steam. The Winnipeg Sea Bears have shaken off a losing skid and the loss of top scorer Teddy Allen.
Top side for the win.
Apparently that's what you say when a player makes a three-point shot. Salami, onions, cheese. Last night, they came from behind to edge the league-leading Vancouver Bandits 88-84. Justin Wright-Foreman with a season-high 32 points for the Sea Bears, including that three-pointer you just heard about there, winning the game. The Sea Bears now stay in Winnipeg, hosting the Saskatchewan Rattlers on Saturday. Salami and cheese.
You know what's fun about that? You know who was in the crowd and really experienced that? Mr. Corey Funk. What was it like in there last night?
It was
people go crazy or what?
It was crazy. Okay, with 4 minutes left, they were down by a lot. And then they set the target score. We're like, okay, this is going to be like, oh, shoot, let's prepare ourselves for this point. But then
just
they kept
Google
scoring.
Target score. It's too hard to explain.
But anyways, they keep scoring and getting rebounds and scoring and scoring. You're like, oh, maybe they got this. And they tied up. You're like, what? And
basically, they needed 20 points and the other team needed 9.
And then it could not have ended more beautifully with that huge 3-pointer, like way past the line from Justin
Amazing.
Wright Foreman. Everyone lost it. Everyone, like the crowd just went nuts.
So Heather Wells, are you still with us? Heather's in the
Yes,
news.
yeah.
So the best is this morning, the three of us were having this conversation, right, with Chuck Swirsky's awesome call. Get out the salami and cheese, right? And we thought, you did, Hev. I thought this was because, like, it's a social.
A social, yeah, that's what, I mean, you're celebrating, you go to a social,
Yeah.
there's salami and cheese.
And it's not. Corey looked it up.
Yeah, no, he's been
It's his
saying it
thing.
since 2007 or so for when he was calling the Raptors. So
Yeah. And
it's a thing.
apparently then he went to Chicago and said, I'm leaving that phrase in Canada.
Yeah.
So he's back here in Winnipeg. He's
And
calling the Sea
bringing
Bears
back the
and
salami and
flying
cheese.
back in the salami. I
I
love it.
wonder what his inspiration for salami and cheese is, though.
Do you know what? There's explanations online about it, but I was looking during
Wikipedia.
the news, and I haven't had a chance to see. I couldn't find a printed article. There were only videos, so obviously I'm hosting the show, so I couldn't.
All I know is that I'm
watch
hungry.
it yet.
Yeah.
It is great. Yeah, it's the best
It's a
line.
good
I love
line.
it.
But yeah, I'm sure they must be feeling the team must be feeling really vindicated after that big change earlier this week that they could still pull off a big win against the best team in the league.
Yeah, it must have been electric. Also because
Huge,
of that, the
huge.
context.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into what's going on. Otherwise, it is time for our regional forecast with Abby.
Good morning once again. 15 in Winnipeg. We're expecting a mix of sun and clouds today with a high chance of showers this afternoon. And that may come with a thunderstorm. The winds shift from the south will make it breezy at some points, and temperatures will be climbing to a high of 25. Tonight, the skies will be partly cloudy, and then we still have that chance of showers sticking around, and that slight chance of thunderstorm also staying with us, with that breezy condition, which will calm down in the early parts of the evening. Now, heading west to Brandon, 9 degrees and partly cloudy at the moment. Today will be mainly cloudy with a chance of showers and a risk of thunderstorm also in the menu. Temperatures will climb to a high of 24 today, and the weather will stay mainly cloudy throughout the day. For Thompson, it is 5 degrees and mainly sunny. Today will feature a mix of sun and clouds and a slight chance of showers late in the morning into the afternoon period. Expect some light and breezy conditions to go with that, and the highs will be around 20 degrees. Further north in Churchill, 8 degrees and mostly cloudy at this time. Expect mainly cloudy skies with a light northwesterly breeze, and the high for today will get to 15. Let's come down to Dauphin, where it's currently 10 degrees and cloudy at the moment. Today we'll see a mix of sun and cloud with a chance of showers and a risk of thunderstorm in the afternoon. The high temperature will be 23. Gimli sitting at 10 degrees under sunny conditions at this moment. The Interlake region should be expecting a mix of sun and clouds with a chance of showers developing in the afternoon period, possibly accompanied by a thunderstorm, and the winds will be light and breezy from the south, reaching about 20 kilometers by the early afternoon, and today's high will be 25. Sandbeck is currently at 12 degrees and sunny at this moment. Expect a mix of sun and clouds throughout the day, a slight chance of showers and possibility of a thunderstorm late in the afternoon. High 25. And Morris sitting at 12 under sunny skies. The forecast for the Pembina Valley region, a mix of sun and clouds, showers in the afternoon, and the high is expected to reach 25. Once again, Winnipeg, we are at 15 and we're heading to a warm high of 25.
Thanks, Abby.
You're welcome.
Corey.
Pretty smooth commute overall, but if you do see something going on out there, if you're walking by, you can drive and give me a call on the CBC commuter line, 204-788-3093.
All right, it's a more coffee morning. Hang on.
Oh, yeah.
I always slurp my coffee on the radio so people can hear it and they don't just hear a pause.
Mm-hmm.
But then some people might like hate that sound.
Probably.
I gotta work on that. All right, at least I'm not taking off my shoes. All right, let's talk to Chrisley Round-McCann, who's here with our business news now. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Marcy.
Earlier this morning, the guys were taking off their shoes. Corey was like, these shoes represent traffic. They're well worn and they've been retreaded. And Abby's like, these shoes represent the forecast. The inside's orange and it looks like sunshine. So do you have business shoes on this morning?
I got my Calvin Klein, sneakers on.
It kind of fits the bill. It's a brand, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about population today. Canada's population topping 41 million people in the first quarter of the year. What effect could that have on the economy, or is that having rather on the economy?
Well, the number of temporary residents has grown to 2.8 million, and the country is seeing the fastest population growth in decades, fueled almost entirely by immigration. And of course, with having more people to fill empty jobs, that can help the economy, but there are also concerns about things like the housing supply. Statistics Canada says for temporary immigration, most of the growth happened before the announcement on caps on the number of permits issued to non-permanent residents this year. So for more on this, we spoke to Mikhail Skuderud, who is a professor of economics at the University of Waterloo. He says, we have been seeing record high population growth, but it is slowing down. And he thinks the government should continue to rethink immigration policies.
We're wondering, what are average living standards and how do we increase the average living standards? And so that literature is pretty clear that if you're going to do that through immigration, it's possible, but the mechanism through which you do that is really about trying to boost the average human capital of the population. When you talk about skilled immigration, people think Canada, that's how you do it. That system has been dismantled. And that's a huge part of why GDP per capita is falling. That's a huge part of what's happening, and we're critical and we're concerned.
So he says in order to increase productivity in a strategic way, Canada should aim to attract newcomers who are highly skilled and educated. And he says the economy will benefit from that kind of approach.
It's interesting because we're going to have a conversation about newcomers in the next hour. Today is actually World Refugee Day. There's a record number of people on the move globally, as listeners might know. But we're going to hear about some of the successes, but also gaps in resources when it comes to settling people in Manitoba. And certainly part of that picture is jobs. Let's talk about businesses, some that are going to be going to get a boost soon. What are we talking about here?
Yes. So the Business Development Bank of Canada is committing $250 million to help Indigenous and Black-led businesses. So the Crown Corporation says it is launching a $50 million program that will provide loans and training for businesses that are majority owned by women, Indigenous, and Black entrepreneurs and have revenues under $3 million. BDC Capital is also launching 2 new $100 million funds to support these kinds of businesses. So the programs will complement a $500 million fund for women that launched in 2022. Now, the chief executive for BDC says too many underrepresented entrepreneurs continue to face the same barriers that existed a decade or even a generation ago. And she says the group needs to support innovation, and the initiatives are part of BDC's efforts to drive greater economic impacts and increase productivity.
And finally, like other production companies, Netflix makes movies and shows, and now it's also going to lean into another familiar revenue stream. This is super interesting.
Yes, so the streaming service is opening massive entertainment venues in 2 cities that it says will allow fans to immerse themselves in the worlds of their favorite shows. So, maybe sounds kind of familiar to something like, say, a Disney theme park, which have monetized content for years. So the complexes called Netflix houses will include elaborate events, themed gift shops, and restaurants. And the houses will be located in former department stores in malls near Philadelphia, and they're set to open next year. So Netflix promises to recreate things like the Glass Bridge Challenge from Squid Game. So that's when competitors walk or jump across clear panels that shatter or drop them if they stand on the wrong one.
Not for me.
Yeah, no, it sounds a little bit scary.
No thanks.
A little too wild for me. But experts say attracting repeat business is going to be a challenge unless the locations are refreshed. But you know what? Netflix has already had success with elaborate touring productions and events. Malaysia is hosting a tour of Bridgerton High Tea. So maybe that's a little more our
speed.
Our speed. Toronto, so here in Canada, has a Knives Out dinner party. And Brazil offers an immersive Stranger Things experience.
I loved that series. Oh, so good.
that, it would be quite, to go back to the kind of like 80s feel and all the, scary stuff there. But, Netflix is really trying to broaden its profile and income beyond streaming as profits in the streaming industry are getting squeezed. Some people are jumping around on their subscriptions, canceling subscriptions. And the company has also cut back on original programming, but it has expanded its video game offerings to try to make some money. And it's also partnered with Williams-Sonoma on a line of Bridgerton-themed dinnerware. So seems like it's really trying to, tap into whatever revenue market it can get into.
Absolutely. And there's so many places now because everyone's clicking, watching, right? Everywhere. What's going on in the markets today?
In Europe, stocks are higher as UK investors look ahead to the Bank of England's policy rate decision. Germany, the UK, and France are all up. In Asia, markets are mostly lower as China keeps its loan prime rates unchanged. So right now, Japan is up, but Shanghai and Hong Kong are both down. Oil is up 13 cents to $81.70 US per barrel. Gold is up $6.70 to $2,353.40 US per ounce. And the dollar is down 0.03 of a cent to 72.93 cents US.
Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. You too.
That's Crystalie Roundlicam with our business news on CBC. It is 13 minutes to 7 o'clock. It's the first day of summer arriving officially this afternoon. We got cloud cover, 15 in Winnipeg to start the day here, though, downtown. I'm Marcy Marcusa. You are listening to Information Radio. The morning show's on air till 8:37 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 a.m. on the app or on YouTube. And we're asking you today to close your eyes and describe your best summer memory. Call the listener line, 788-3205. We're going to hear one of your calls in a moment. First, a little bit of music from Maddie J., who says as she gets older, she's learning that happiness can be found in the simpler things in life. Ain't that the truth? This is Maddie J. featuring Chase Segley with Every Little Thing.
Every little thing drives me wild. My worries start to overstay. I'll think myself to death one day. Potential fading. I'm turning 30 soon. You wipe my eyes, say no one's immune from aging. Our friends are 32. That's what you're supposed to do. Sometimes we're better in the dark. Uncertainty could be your art. Panic when I'm not in control. Imagine if you learn to let go. Wanna be in love with my life. What if you're doing everything right?
Maddie J. featuring Chase Segley with Every Little Thing. Well, speaking of appreciating and leaning into those little things, we've asked you about your favorite summer memory. Here's a call we got.
Shirley DeLorme Russell, this is easy. My best summer memory ever is the summers between grade 9 and 10 and 10 and 11, especially the summer between 10 and 11. I had a group of friends. We all lived in the same neighborhood. We only had house phones, no cell phones yet. We would spend the day gathering each other from one house to the next house, to the next house, to the next house, until finally we got everybody, and we'd just sit at the park and we'd figure out what to do. And we didn't have cars. We all had bikes, and if we didn't have bikes, we doubled. Man, we were like everywhere that summer. It was pretty awesome.
Shirley, thanks for the call. I really like that that's a simple memory. Mine's simple like that as well. I'll share a little later in the show. But if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, yes, I have a story to share, just don't overthink it. What's your best summer memory? 788-3205. Today is the longest day of the year and the official start of summer. Arrives at 3:50 this afternoon, don't you know? To have a look at the weather for the next few months, a bigger picture look at the summer. Dave Phillips is up early with us and here. He's a senior climatologist, as you likely know, with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
Can you answer the question? I'm putting you on the spot, but do you have a favorite summer memory? If you don't overthink it, you just go, oh, where were you? What were you doing?
Well, I lived in Windsor, Ontario as a youngster, and we used to go to Point Pelee, and I would go swimming there, and I'd love it. But then there was also a bad memory because I was fair-skinned, and I would just absolutely burn to a crisp. And I'd come home, and I would just put my mother would put Noxema all over my body, and I was just like a beet. And so I love the swimming in the sun and enjoying it at the beach, one of the great national parks in Canada. But then it also had some implications in the days after.
I love summer memories. Often evoke like smells and feels, like that Noxema, the cold Noxema on the hot skin.
Exactly.
I can feel it as you're saying it. All right, 788-3205. You are here though to tell us what it's going to be like this summer. We have already been hearing about the heat waves in parts of Eastern Canada this week. Right. How concerning will the heat be overall in Canada this year?
Well, we think it's certainly going to be warm up. In the east, what we've seen right now is, hey, it's only the start of it. We still have a month to go to get the dog days of summer when we normally see, statistically at least, the warmest temperatures. But out in the west, my gosh, they're sending search parties looking for winter. It's like the June gloom or the January that they often describe in British Columbia. We're just seeing a lot of weather systems. It's kind of coolish. You've had a few teasers. My gosh, you might remember, I think it was, when I look at my numbers here, May the 11th, it got up to almost 31 degrees.
Yeah, the one-day wonder.
One-day wonder, exactly. And you thought, well, okay, get the linens out, start making the mint juleps because summer is here. And, well, it just is now missing, and we haven't seen anything like that since then. Although I do see this week, we see some kind of consecutive days above normal. So going to have to be a little bit more patient, certainly out in the West. We think it will come out to be, our models are saying, Europeans and Americans agree, they're saying it's going to be a warmer than normal summer in Manitoba, really across the West. But it's probably not going to come till about the middle of July and then be pretty short. So maybe, Marcy, this September will be what your June normally is. And so we've just delayed kind of summer. So still a lot of time to go. It's been sort of well watered. So that's been kind of a good news. But we now need some heat to warm it up.
Hang on a minute. Well watered is an understatement. I should ask you about that. We should look back just for a moment, because what kind of a winter-spring season are we emerging from here?
Well, we had certainly in Manitoba, if you look at the 6 months, from December right through to May, which is the winter-spring period, we came out in Manitoba from a temperature point of view. In 77 years, if you rank them from the warmest to the coldest, came out to be number 3. So, it was almost like you cheated winter. Now, spring has been kind of, I think, disappointing towards the end, but early on it was warmer than normal. But moisture-wise, it's been very wet.
How much will that help with wildfires, though, if I could just interject and ask that?
Well, you know, we had a lot of concern last year. I mean, not necessarily Manitoba. Manitoba was the one jurisdiction in Canada of the 13 jurisdictions that had fewer fires than normal.
Right? It was strange.
But
We were a real outlier last year. We were affected by the
Absolutely.
smoke, but not the fires in the same way.
And you've had a bit more now than this year than last year, but it's still been not an issue, not the concern that we saw last year. And you know, Marcy, you didn't maybe see the fires last year, but you certainly smelt the smoke. And that has certainly been lacking this year, and that's good. I mean, I think we're in far better shape than what people first thought was going to happen, given the fact that it was kind of a dry kind of a winter, and there was a lot of nervousness with some of these zombie fires that kind of break out again. But I think the situation is far better. We've just a fraction of the area burned and the number of fires. So I think we're in good shape. Now the problem is we're entering the lightning season. About 75% of our lightning occurs at the 1st of July, and it's going to be warmer than normal across Canada, we think, this July and August and September. So we're not out of the woods yet, but there is certainly a lot more hope that we're not going to be in a situation like we had last year.
All right, Dave. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And have a wonderful summer as well.
Thank you, and you too, Marcy. Bye-bye now.
Dave Phillips is Senior Climatologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Our question on this first day of summer, what's your favorite summer memory? Best summer memory? Don't overthink it. It sometimes is the simple things, as we've already heard. The listener line is up, and if you're watching YouTube, you can see it there. If you're listening on the radio, 788-3205, 788-3205. It is time to check in with Heather Wells now on our news headlines for your Thursday morning. Hi, Heather.
Hi there. Well, a Winnipeg lawsuit is seeking billions of dollars for a failed plan to manufacture COVID-19 vaccine in Manitoba. We're going to hear some details of what was proposed, what was planned, and then didn't happen. And it is being called a uniquely Manitoban merger. Assiniboine Credit Union, Case Financial Group, and Westoba Credit Union, all three will form one, creating one of the largest credit unions in Manitoba, and it will be in the top 10 in Canada. I'll be back with more Manitoba news at 7:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, right now, out our studio window on Portage Ave, it looks like we've got some blue sky and just a few clouds hanging around out there. We do have for today mostly a mix of sun and cloud, later a 60% chance of showers, and we have an afternoon risk of a thunderstorm. A high of 25, and it could be a little sticky feeling out there. 15 in Winnipeg currently. In Brandon, it's 8. Thompson is 6 and mainly sunny. On the morning drive, remember Louise Bridge remains closed until June 28th. And if you see anything else that's causing issue this morning, 788-3093, whether you're driving, walking, or rolling in Winnipeg or out somewhere on the highways or in your hometown in Manitoba, 788-3093. That is the traffic line. In the next hour of the show, Ukraine, Chad, Ethiopia, Latin America. Refugees have been making their way to Manitoba from all over the world. Today, a guest who reminds us that, quote, settlement services are not the only services that newcomers interact with. We're going to hear how she's working to improve systems in our province to better meet people's needs. So stay tuned. It is World Refugee Day today. In addition, the city's top civil servant has resigned less than a week after an audit of the city's workforce and found a lack of processes for reviewing staff performance. But what happens next? And are those two things related? We're going to ask the mayor. Also, a bit of a graduation memory fun moment with Scott Gillingham. He's provided us with a photo. So stay tuned. The mayor's in the studio in the next hour of the show. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is your Thursday Information Radio. And your CBC World Report is coming up next.
Today on The Current.
McNeil right in the hunt. Maggie McNeil certainly is in the hunt with 15 meters to go.
The swimmer Maggie McNeil is looking to defend her Olympic gold in Paris. Could be her last games, and she's dealing with asthma brought on by chlorine. But she thinks her chances are good. Maggie McNeil coming up on The Current.
The Current with Matt Galloway. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. An out-of-control wildfire in central Labrador is threatening the town of Churchill Falls. An evacuation order is in effect. More than 700 residents were forced to leave their homes in just a matter of minutes. Susan Chislett was one of them.
For me, I'm born and bred in Churchill Falls. So we've seen fires before, but they've never amounted to this.
Evacuees made their way east to Happy Valley Goose Bay with one highway out of town, a 3-hour drive, and hazardous weather. Terry Griffin says the journey was difficult.
We ran into this vicious thunderstorm. It was just crazy. I'd never seen nothing like it, not in my lifetime. I haven't. I'm 64 years old. I haven't seen anything like it. That was nuts. Almost to the point that I wanted to turn and go back to Churchill instead of coming here. That's how crazy it was.
High temperatures, strong winds, and thunderstorms could make firefighting difficult. Water bombers are working to keep the flames at bay. While Labrador battles wildfire and a heat dome covers parts of Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces, new research is revealing how climate change is making heat waves even worse. The study looked at the historic heat wave in Central and North America earlier this spring. And as Anayat Singh reports, researchers say events like that will happen more often.
The efforts to rescue Mexico's howler monkeys as they fell from trees with heat stroke became the symbol of the extreme heat wave that hit the region in May and June. And climate scientists from World Weather Attribution say those conditions will now happen more frequently. They estimate the heat wave that hit North and Central America was made 35 times more likely due to human-induced climate change, including the burning of fossil fuels. Ruth Cerezo Mota is with the research group.
As this gets worse, the consequences as well will be worse, and we will be risking the loss of biodiversity here in the region.
World Weather Attribution studies weather disasters like heat waves and floods to measure the impacts of climate change. This kind of heat wave is now expected to happen once every 15 years, up from once every 60.
We'll never know the world that we knew in our childhood.
Bushra Askar is a youth climate organizer from Montreal.
Where like the access to outdoors wasn't like, it didn't come with like a fatal warning or a caution, you know?
Askar said that makes cutting emissions a question of justice for younger generations facing a grim future of weather extremes. Inayat Singh, CBC News, Toronto.
Iran's foreign ministry is condemning Canada's move to label the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organization. Iran is calling it unwise and unconventional, and a spokesperson for the ministry says it will not diminish the Revolutionary Guard's regional influence. Canada's decision was announced by Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc yesterday. He says it aims to combat global terrorism and restrict senior Iranian officials from entering Canada. In exactly 2 weeks, British voters will cast their ballots in a general election. Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called the vote, but if the latest polls are accurate, that might have been a big mistake. And he could be about to see the downfall of his party. Anna Cunningham reports.
Putting on a life jacket and heading out with local lobster fishermen on Britain's southwest coast. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
We have to stop the boat, something I'm determined to do and have a clear plan to do so.
Pushing his immigration policy on the campaign trail. But even in a week when over 800 undocumented migrants crossed the English Channel in a single day, polling is consistent and there is now no political life jacket that can save Sunak or his party.
Conservatives are at the moment heading for their worst performance since the First World War.
Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, says all polls point in one direction.
Not even the more in common poll suggests they're going to quite reach their lowest ever number of seats in the House of Commons, which is 156 all the way back in 1906.
The Brexiteer and Reform Party leader Nigel Farage has entered the race, comparing his thorn in the Conservatives' side to that of Canada's 1993 Conservative wipeout. His aim to pull voters away from Conservatives, destroying the party's foundations. But it's Labour Party leader Sir Keir Starmer, who many say is the Prime Minister in waiting.
Today we can lay a new foundation of stability. And on that foundation we can start to rebuild Britain.
He's campaigning on one word: change. Labour hopes the British public will do just that on July 4th. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is getting a warm welcome in Vietnam. Putin Putin arrived in Hanoi this morning. He's there to strengthen Russia's ties with the Southeast Asian country. Vietnamese President To Lam congratulated Putin on his recent electoral victory. He says there is a strong bond between the two nations. But the United States is Vietnam's top trading partner, and it condemns any normalizing of relations with Russia. The U.S. has been working to sanction and isolate Russia over the war in Ukraine. A CBC News investigation is uncovering troubling accusations against a husband and wife law firm. It's accused of embezzling millions of dollars from nearly 30 aspiring homeowners. Zach Dubinsky has the details.
This was a very simple yet elaborate fraud.
Thierry Cohen-Scally believes he was defrauded and is just one of dozens of homebuyers or sellers who wish they'd never had to do business with the law firm of Cartel and Bowie. He sold his house in Toronto last year after moving to Florida. Because he lives abroad, the homebuyer's lawyer held back 25% of the price in case he owed capital gains taxes. In the end, he didn't, but Cartel and Bowie hasn't reimbursed his money, $465,000. And Cohen-Scally is not alone. In a dozen lawsuits, homebuyers and sellers accuse the firm of embezzling or improperly withholding $6.7 million of their funds.
You're dealing with a lawyer, you think you're protected. That was the biggest shock.
The law firm had two partners, Singa Bowie and husband Nicholas Cartel. CBC News has obtained court documents suggesting their own mortgages, credit card bills, and business taxes were paid with their client's cash. Cartel says he had nothing to do with the missing money, and he's taking the allegations against him seriously. The Law Society of Ontario, however, has provisionally suspended both of them. Veteran real estate lawyer Balvinder Kumar says lawyers failing to pay money as promised is a risk most homebuyers aren't aware of.
In spite of the fact that the lawyers are giving undertakings, it may or may not happen. Unfortunately, we have no control over that because that's how the system is.
The lawsuits against Cartel and Bowie are back in court this morning. Zach Dubinsky, CBC News, Toronto.
WestJet's potential mechanic strike has been averted. Last night, both parties agreed to resume negotiations, and the Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association rescinded their strike notice. Talks to resolve the labor dispute resume next week. In anticipation of the strike, WestJet had canceled more than 30 flights. Some federal public servants say a robot is spying on them. It was part of a government pilot project to optimize federal workspaces. As Arthur White-Crummey reports, a public service union suspects the robot really is checking on attendance.
Are you poised for the next era of workplace innovation? Discover the future with Verbrix.
Federal public servants are discovering that future in the form of a waist-high device. It looks like a scanner with a white globe on it that's been prowling around their offices.
Folks say, why is there a robot here? Doesn't my employer trust that I'm here and doing my work properly?
That's Government Services Union National President Bruce Roy. He calls the robot insulting. He worries about data security and says some call the robot a spy. Here's how the company that built it responds.
It's not a spy.
Yahya Saad of Global DWS says the data is anonymized. The robot doesn't know who it's looking at. Its camera allows it to count employees. Then it destroys the image.
It only measures environmental, like health and safety measures, and the number of people in a space.
That's what the federal government is interested in, as it looks to cut its office footprint. Public Services and Procurement Minister Jean-Yves Duclos says the robot will help pinpoint which spaces are used the most and which aren't. Saad says it can do much more than that. Its sensors measure temperature, humidity, light, noise, methane, even radon levels to help employers fine-tune the work environment and keep employees productive and happy. But Roy says it's only feeding distrust after the union blocked an effort to install infrared and movement sensors at workstations.
We feel there's a privacy breach.
A pilot project at 3 federal buildings wrapped up in March, but the robot is set to return in July. Arthur White-Crummey, CBC News, Ottawa.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
Good morning, Manitoba. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. We're live in downtown Winnipeg on 89.3 FM, 990 AM, on the app or on YouTube. Wherever you're finding us, thanks for making us part of your Thursday. It is the first day of summer. Abby's in with our forecast and what that's going to look like in just a moment. This hour on the show, we're continuing to take your calls about your favorite summer memories. Close your eyes. Where were you? What did it smell like? What did it look like? 788-3205. Well, to other matters. Today is World Refugee Day. There's a record number of people on the move globally. Coming up, we're going to hear about some of the successes and some of the gaps in resources when it comes to settling people in Manitoba. As my guest has said, quote, settlement services are not the only services that newcomers interact with. So we're going to find out about some of the initiatives to get people involved where they need to be as they land here in our province. Also, some inner-city community groups are worried about a funding cut, and after 21 years with the city, the CAO has resigned. The mayor of the city of Winnipeg in for our regular monthly interview, and we'll ask some questions and seek some clarity about those things with Scott Gillingham when he's here live at 7:45. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells for other news headlines. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, a Point Douglas man calls it garbage upon garbage. Marshall Weeb lives across the back lane from a Main Street property that burned 16 months ago. What was surplus direct is still a pile of rubble, and he says people are now dumping their garbage on top of that pile. Weeb says if this happened in another part of Winnipeg like Sage Creek, it would have been cleaned up long ago. Manitoba's largest First Nation is concerned apartment and condo buildings going up at the Forks could damage archaeological evidence at the historic site. Mike Sutherland at Peguis First Nation wants Peguis and other members included in a formal consultation process. We'll hear about that in our next local news at 7:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Abby has a forecast.
Good morning once again. 15 in Winnipeg. We're expecting a mix of sun and clouds throughout the day. There's a high chance of showers this afternoon. A risk of thunderstorm to go with that, and it will become breezy as the wind shifts from the south this late morning. We're looking at a high that's going to be touching 25 today with some humidity. Now tonight, partly cloudy with a chance of showers also, and also risk of thunderstorm. The breeze will calm down as we get into the early parts of the evening. And a sneak peek into tomorrow, it's going to start sunny and then the transition into a mix of sun and clouds. But right now, Winnipeg, we are at 15. We're going to see a mix of sun and clouds today. A good chance of showers and possible thunderstorms later. And tonight, partly cloudy, a high of 25.
Thank you, Abby.
You're welcome.
With a quick look at the commute, here's Corey Funk.
Yeah, really quiet commute overall so far. But if you do see something going on out there, give me a call on the CBC commuter line. No one's called yet, but I imagine there's something going on there. I know there always is. Give me a call, 204-788-3093.
Well, as I mentioned, today is World Refugee Day, a day to mark the efforts of those who've been forced to flee their homes and build new lives elsewhere. Earlier this month, the United Nations said the number of people forcibly displaced stood at a record 117.3 million as of the end of 2023. And of course, a lot of those people land here in Winnipeg. In a moment, we're going to hear from a Manitoban who is working to help people succeed here. First, though, some of the voices of people who have shared their stories with us this spring. Anna Bilyega came to Winnipeg in 2022 after war in Ukraine broke out. Ibrahim Sarhan, who's now 20 but was injured as a child during a rocket attack in Syria, shared his story. And the first person we're about to hear from is a refugee who fled Uganda with his wife and toddlers in tow. He found himself at the Salvation Army over on Main Street. We're not using his name because he fears being identified back home.
We didn't know anyone here. We had nowhere to go. We reached Salvation Army. They took us in. We were tired, but they welcomed us.
How much do you remember about that moment?
That day, we were very depressed. We were tired. We spent a whole night at the train station.
What was that night in the train station like with your two little kids in the middle of Winnipeg in November?
That night, 2 days in the train, it wasn't easy. My kids had nowhere to sleep. My kids got affected and they got sick. We're not used to this. We're not used to this kind of weather. We don't have winter in my home. And that night we spent at the Union Station because we had nowhere to go. We had no money for the hotel. My kids got sick. I couldn't access the medical facility. Everything was new to us. When we reached here, we didn't know we could get help. But when one lady saw us with 2 infants, they straight away took our kids in, and they took my wife. They gave us a room. My kids slept for more than 8 hours.
It's just a dress which my mom sent me from Ukraine. Yeah, my mom is still there and my dad and sister actually.
What's that like for you? How are you holding up here?
You know, actually, I can say that I'm lucky here, and Manitoba was really friendly for me because when I came here, first of all, I found a job, and for me it was much easier to start my life here. But of course, I came here alone, so it was somehow a little difficult, too much scary, you know, oh my God, it's new country, so far from my home. But thanks God and very grateful for government, community, all programs here for Ukrainian and newcomers that I never feel even one day lonely.
So when it first broke out, my mom's family had a farm. So that day my mom was doing laundry, and my aunt was cleaning the farmhouse, and that's where the helicopter first came, and we heard some gunshots. You know, we started rushing into the farmhouse, and my mom was calling me just minutes, moments before the rocket hit our farm. I saw everybody praying, right? Like my mom, the kids, asking God for help. We heard the first few ones, and it's just like a whistle, and everything shakes, you know? The house shakes if it's close to you. So that was happening until we got, the last rocket which hit our farm, and that's when everything went dark. And I opened my eyes, I couldn't move any part of my body, not even my hands, just my eyeballs. Then I was actually away from the farmhouse, I was 2 meters away. And I started passing out, and then coming back to life, passing out, until I remember somebody holding me, running with me. That's what I remember. My hands hanging away from my body, and I just saw blood coming out of my hand, and that's where I was put in a taxi, just to go to rush to the hospital. I hate war and how it affects children, how it breaks out families. Any country, any leader that can get the children out of those conflicts, it would be really appreciated, because it really impacts children forever. Not for a day or two, but forever. Even though I came to Canada, it's a dream to come to Canada, yeah? But a lot of moments I sat with myself, I said, what if I was here with my family? It would have been really different. I would have been really happy.
Those were the voices of Ibrahim Sarhan, Annabelle Yega, and before that, a Ugandan father. My next guest is Emily Halderson. She's here via Zoom. She's a humanitarian response specialist with the Manitoba Association of Newcomer Serving Organizations, or MANSO. She led settlement coordination for Ukrainians, and she is working on coordinating services in all sectors. Currently, she's also working on some new training initiatives for agencies that haven't previously been involved in settlement, like the Salvation Army that we visited this spring and heard about. And she joins us. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So what did you hear just now? I mean, there was a lot in those stories, but what speaks to some of the work that you've been doing in Manitoba recently?
Yeah, thanks for bringing on those stories and sharing those clips. As I was listening to the man from Uganda, I was thinking about how his story does kind of epitomize some of the experiences for refugee claimants specifically. Today on World Refugee Day, we're kind of focusing on refugee claimants this year and raising awareness about their experiences. And a lot of refugee claimants have that experience that he had, where they come to Manitoba and they don't necessarily have a lot of services in place for them. We don't have the same reception set up for them that we have set up for, say, government-assisted refugees or privately sponsored refugees. And so they do come and find themselves, sitting in a train station all night, waiting to figure out what their next steps are. He mentioned not having access to healthcare. That's something that happens. Refugee claimants don't have access to healthcare, any income support, or even the ability to have a work permit when they first arrive. They have to wait until they submit their claim, until they have access to all of those things. So so it's very difficult for them in those initial days, for sure. And then just speaking to the Ukrainian person that was on the clip right after that, that's an example of how we can create more of a organized way of receiving temporary residents, because despite the fact that Ukrainians are a temporary resident group as well, they did receive that warm welcome. And there was a framework created to receive them. So it's a great example of what we can do for people that are coming to Manitoba.
So I know that that's one of the areas you're working on right now to make that happen for everyone. So where have you made gains? Because I understand that even the homelessness sector or agencies that previously had worked in that area, like the Salvation Army, but others as well, are part of the picture now in settling people, and even schools. You're doing some training in schools. Can you talk more about that, sort of as you try to strengthen across the board how people are welcomed here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like the settlement sector and organizations that are really experienced with working with newcomers, they know a lot of these nuances, between what's the experience for someone who comes here as an international student, what are they eligible for versus a temporary foreign worker or a refugee claimant or a permanent resident. But it's super complicated to the average person out there. And probably most people just think of newcomers as, a group of people who arrive here with the same kind of services, but it is not the case. So one of the things that we have been doing, the organization I work for, MANSO, along with a lot of the organizations in the settlement sector that provide services to newcomers, is working a lot more with other sectors. So as you mentioned, the homelessness sector, they are seeing refugee claimants coming into the shelters. They're needing support. Just, how do you work with this group? What are some of the things that would help redesign or just shift your way of working with your clients and your participants a little bit to be a little more newcomer focused, to be a little bit more culturally oriented. For example, just having interpretation available, for example, is not something that every organization has. So yeah, working with the homelessness sector, we also have been training, as you mentioned, them, but also people working in hospitals who are seeing more people of different immigration statuses, and they're not necessarily sure how to help them connect beyond, when they get out of the hospital. What are the things they can help them connect to in the newcomer sector? So yeah, there's a lot of that work going on for sure.
How does the growing number of refugees that arrive and settle in Manitoba, what's the effect on the school populations, and what kind of training are you doing within schools? Because I was just thinking about the man with his toddlers here, and once you get over all those initial things to settle the family, I mean that's going to be that's always the most immediate point of contact if you have children of school age. So I know you're doing some work with schools as well.
Yeah, our sector has a position, a title, I guess you'd call it, called a settlement worker in school. So those people are really great conduits kind of for this information. They're working in the school setting. So I think that would be the main opportunity for us to make inroads into the school systems. Now, not every school has one of these settlement workers in the school setting. Especially, we saw during the Ukrainian group, a lot of Ukrainians coming, large numbers of Ukrainians coming over the last couple of years. We saw that a lot of people went to, for example, rural communities and places all across Manitoba, and they don't necessarily have those settlement workers in school. So trying to build up that capacity of people who are working in the school system, who are able to support the kids directly in different languages, and also that supports the parents, because you can imagine if you're new here in Canada, everything is new. The school system is one of the things that is very different in different countries. So there's a lot for them to learn and adjust to, and the settlement workers in schools are one of the best ways to help them figure out how to do that and make that adjustment.
How many refugee claimants have you worked with in the past year, say, Emily? Or maybe you have a stat that goes beyond that, but I'm just trying to get a sense of where people are mostly coming from now in Manitoba and how many people we're seeing as refugees.
Yeah, so there's different types of refugees, as I mentioned. So government-assisted refugees, there was a little over 1,400 in 2023. Privately sponsored refugees, there was 1,400. Government-assisted, there was 1,200. And refugee claimants, it is a smaller number, even though the number is growing. There was about 760 65 people who put in a refugee claim in Manitoba last year. And that number is definitely growing this year. People are coming from really any place in the world that there might be some conflict going on, but people also could be claiming refugee status based on other things, such as being from the queer community, and maybe there is laws in their country that are against that.
Other reasons for
Or
being on the move.
Gender-based violence,
Yeah.
environmental disasters, all sorts of things. So we are seeing more folks from Africa, I would say, than other parts of the world. But there are people from all over the place because, unfortunately, as you mentioned at the beginning, the numbers of people displaced worldwide are huge.
Unprecedented.
You also mentioned that we're taking we're accepting a large number of refugees, but really, in the grand scheme of things, we're not, right? We could, I think, be doing a lot more for sure.
There are more questions and there are more answers on a live stream that's happening today. So I know that you guys are having an event. Is that going to be on Facebook or is that going to be on YouTube for Manso?
Yeah, it's going to be on YouTube, and the YouTube channel is at Manso Manitoba. So Manso is MANSO, and then the whole word Manitoba. And yeah, feel free to tune in at 10
to 12.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Thank you very much, Emily, for all of your time this morning. There's so much to go through. We appreciate it.
Yes, for sure. We could talk a long time, I'm sure. Thank you.
So that's why you have to tune in from 10 to 2 and take part to ask your questions and also learn more about Manso and all the organizations and how they're connected. Emily Halderson's been with us via Zoom, humanitarian response specialist with the Manitoba Association of Newcomer Serving Organizations. So you can check out mansomanitoba.ca, the live stream today, 10 to noon, and check it out on YouTube and take part if you have questions on this World Refugee Day. It is time now, though, for questions for Claude Faig, who's in with Morning Sports. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
Start with the Bombers getting set for tomorrow night's game against BC, but injury is a concern, right?
True, it's certainly rarefied air for the Blue Bombers, but not in a positive way these days. The last time the Blue and Gold kicked off a season with 2 straight losses was in 2016. But they did go on to win 11 times that year. Injuries have certainly been a part of the Bombers' missed start so far, especially on offense, where they rank second last in points scored. Running back Brady Oliveira was a big part of the offense last year. A coming-out party that included 13 touchdowns and over 1,500 yards rushing. But Oliveira has been sidelined with a knee injury, yet to take any reps this week. And his coach, Mike O'Shea, isn't sure if he'll be able to go for their game this week.
Brady's been working pretty hard, and Al puts him through the paces every day, and then we sort of see how he is after the workouts. The real question you want to know is Brady going to play or not? I don't have that answer yet. We'll see how he feels later today. I know he's doing another workout right now. Where that puts him, I don't know yet. We always give him the benefit of the doubt, right, that guy.
And the Bombers host the BC Lions, of course, tomorrow night.
Canada's men's soccer team has a stiff test in their opening match at the Copa America tonight, hey?
That's true. In fact, Canada's men's national soccer side will finally get a chance to play at the Copa America. That's been 23 years in the making. Back in 2001, Canada was invited to compete after stunning the Americas and winning the Gold Cup in 2000. But security concerns in the host country of Colombia kept the team from going. Fast forward to tonight in Atlanta with a rather tall task for the Canadian side, a date with perennial powerhouse Argentina and their aging superstar Lionel Messi in front of a sellout crowd of over 70,000 expected at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. The team, under the guidance of Jesse Marsh, who assumed the reins back in May when John Herdman left to go coach Toronto FC, believes that his group can more than hold his own against the Argentinians and the rest of the group.
And we know how good they are. But where we are in our process, it's more about us. I'm having the team focus on what we think is important, how to continue our development path. And we still feel like if we can do that in the match, that we can be successful. We know it's the biggest challenge that we could be presented with, but I'm confident in our team. I'm confident in the process we created. And I believe that we will have a very good match and that the players will go after the game in every way.
And the match is set for 6 p.m. Mountain Time tonight.
And a very familiar name in golf, eyeing her chance to represent Canada.
That's true. You know, Canada's most decorated golfer, in fact, Brooke Henderson of Smith Falls, Ontario. Her best finish at the Olympics in previous times was a 7th place tie in 2016. She's getting a chance to go again to Paris this year. and hoping to certainly improve on that standing for Canada.
All right, Claude, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Claude Faig with Morning Sports. The Mayor's live on CBC after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, it's sunny, 15 degrees. We will see some clouds move in, maybe even a thunderstorm later today. But this is the first official day of summer, and we're going to feel like summer. 25 degrees in Winnipeg this afternoon. Manitoba's largest First Nation is concerned a housing development planned for the Forks isn't adequately consulting with them. Peguis First Nation also believes the project could compromise archaeological evidence and belongings of cultural and spiritual significance at the site. CBC's Rosanna Hempel reports.
The Forks is expected to break ground on 10 apartment and condo buildings late this summer. Mike Sutherland is the Director of Consultation and Special Projects with Peguis First Nation. He says they met with the Forks in May about their concerns, but he says it's unclear how or whether they'll be formally accommodated and consulted.
But let's do this right, because if they unearth ancestors' artifacts, we want to be there to monitor that and make sure they're not damaged.
The Forks says it's hosted public consultations on the project over the last decade. They also commissioned an investigation into the housing site in 2017. It recovered few animal remains and artifacts. A spokesperson says the buildings won't have basements or underground parkades to preserve any archaeological evidence. The Forks says it's glad Peguis has come forward and that their conversations are ongoing. Rosanna Hempel, CBC News, Winnipeg.
People in Point Douglas say they are fed up with piles of rubble in their neighborhood. It has been 16 months since fire destroyed 3 businesses on Main Street. Since then, 2 of the properties have been cleaned up, but a pile of rubble remains where the Surplus Direct store once stood. Marshall Wiebe lives across the back lane from that property.
We've had people come down our back lane and just dump their garbage on top of the rubble pile itself. It's garbage compounded upon garbage, and it's just, we don't like it because we do our best to keep up our end of the neighborhood, but yeah, it just attracts a lot of negativity for sure.
The property owner declined an interview request, but says the province has imposed a stop work order over possible asbestos contamination. He says his own tests showed no trace of asbestos. An Alberta company is suing an American company after a plan to manufacture a COVID-19 vaccine in Manitoba didn't go ahead. Providence Therapeutics had a plan to produce tens of millions of doses of its COVID-19 vaccine in Winnipeg during the pandemic. In 2021, Providence turned to an American company, Emergent Biosolutions, for commercial vaccine production. Emergent has a facility in Winnipeg, but the plan failed to go ahead. Now Providence is suing Emergent Biosolutions for more than $3 billion. Both companies declined to comment on the lawsuit. Manitoba's government is expected to release more details today into its plan to search a landfill for the remains of 2 women. CBC's Ian Fraze reports.
The province will host a technical briefing about the landfill search later today. The government is expected to lay out in greater detail how it will search the Prairie Green landfill. The remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron are believed to be there. They are 2 victims of admitted serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky. Last week, the government announced the search would happen in 5 stages. In the coming weeks, workers will sift through one area of the landfill to understand the consistency of the material. They will then turn their focus to a targeted area where the remains are believed to be. If that's unsuccessful, Premier Wabkanu says the search area will expand. The Harris and Myron families have been demanding a landfill search for a year and a half. Ian Fraze, CBC News, Winnipeg.
It is being called a uniquely Manitoban merger. 3 credit unions have voted to merge, creating one of the largest credit unions in Manitoba and one of the top 10 in Canada. Assiniboine Credit Union, Case Financial Group, and Westoba Credit Union will become one, effective January 1st, 2025. A Winnipeg teen is getting set to take his talents across the border to play ultimate frisbee, and he's doing it on an athletic scholarship. Cale Peterson is heading to Davenport University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He says it's nice to see ultimate being treated as an actual sport.
Some people think of it more as a hobby, so it's cool. We get all the same equipment and all the same facilities as the other university sports do, so that's going to be really nice, and we get our own trainers and everything.
When he graduates from Calvin High School, Peterson will be studying business at Davenport. And the Winnipeg Sea Bears have shaken off a losing skid and the loss of their top scorer, Teddy Allen.
Top side for the win. Baker is good. Get out the salami and cheese, mama. Onions, baby onions. Justin Wright.
Baby onions. That was a 3-point shot made by Justin Wright Foreman with a season-high 32 points for the Sea Bears, including that 3-pointer. Last night, the Sea Bears beating the league-leading Vancouver Bandits 88-84. The Sea Bears stay in Winnipeg now. They host Saskatchewan Rattlers on Saturday. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Exciting game last night. Man, oh man. Super fun if you were there, as Corey Funk was. He's been talking about it all morning. The other thing Corey's been doing is taking your calls on the listener line, because today's the first official day of summer. Arrives at 10 to 4 this afternoon. I know I'm saying that ad nauseum, but it's a good factoid for today while you're at the water cooler. Abby's going to deliver the forecast in a moment. But first, you are sharing with us those calls I mentioned Corey has been listening to, your best summer memories.
Hi, this is Jane Hebden. I just wanted to talk about my summer memory. And one of my best ones is just sitting in the hot summer sun with my mom on our back patio, shelling peas. We had a nice sized garden, and every year we would sit and just shell peas to freeze. We'd have these really interesting talks. And that was the simple thing, is I learned more about my mom as a real person, because she'd tell me stories about who she was. And those conversations stuck with me. And I think we don't understand our parents as people until we have those conversations. They may never have happened if we hadn't have been there shelling peas on a summer day. Thanks.
I love that. There's something that slows down, right? Especially with those garden moments. For myself as well, in the middle of Transcona with my aunt and uncle, just pulling sunflowers out of the center of their huge flowers in their backyard. And for whatever reason, remembering that all these years later. So call us. What's your favorite summer memory, your best summer memory? What comes to mind for you? What did it smell like, look like, feel like? 788-3205. And now, with your first day of summer forecast, here is Abby.
15 degrees in the city, partly cloudy. We're seeing the sun try to make its appearance beneath those clouds there. We should be seeing a mix of sun and clouds for the most of the day. Expect a chance of showers with a risk of thunderstorm to come with that. It will be light with some breezy conditions as temperatures climb to 25. Now for tonight, expect partly cloudy conditions with possible showers. Brandon is currently at 10 degrees, heading to 24. Thompson is at 9, heading to a high of 20. Further north in Churchill, 9 degrees under mostly cloudy conditions, high of 15. Dauphin is at 11, going to 23. Gimli at 13, heading to 25. Steinbach is at 12, heading to 25. Morris finally under sunny conditions and also at 12 degrees, heading to a high of 25. Winnipeg sitting at 15 and heading to a high of 25 also.
All right, thanks, Abby.
You're welcome.
Corey Funk.
It really has been a smooth commute overall this morning from what I've heard. A few construction spots, obviously westbound Portage, still an issue from Lipton to about Wall Street. Those far left lanes still are blocked for sewer work. So looking for that. Stay right to get around that. But if you do see anything else, 204-788-3093.
Can I ask you, I alluded to the fact that you were actually in the arena last night. You know, watching on the hard court as the Sea Bears had that epic game Heather was describing. What was it like in there, the energy?
You know what? Like when they scored that final 3-pointer from like way back beyond the line, everyone.
I love when they put those up too, because they always hang.
It was,
and you're waiting,
and you're watching. Like it felt like time slowed down. Then all of a sudden, everyone up on their feet, whole crowd going nuts, because like it's just an underdog story to the nth degree. From losing Teddy Allen earlier in the week, everyone kind of coming in with low expectations. And then Seabear's proven that they could do it without him. And Justin Wright Foreman steps up and scores like over 30 points.
Fun stuff.
Wild. It was amazing. Everyone was just, it was electric. It was
And
awesome.
I can't hear that call enough, which we thought was about socials because it's about salami and cheese, but it's not. It's just Chuck Swirsky's catchphrase.
I love it. Baby onions, baby.
Does that mean the little onions? We're overthinking it.
Yeah, I think so. Just fun.
Fun stuff. So you might be a little bleary-eyed this morning. Well, I shouldn't say. The game was early. It was, I think you guys were out by 9, right?
Yeah, around there, 9:30.
Yeah. There sure is a lot of buzz around town about the Sea Bears, so good on them for getting the win last night. 20 to 8 is the time right now on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us and for watching and listening this morning. Next on the show, a plea for trees and a trip down graduation memory lane, plus some questions about the resignation of the city's top civil servant and concerns from some community groups about a planned funding cut. All that's on the table for today's monthly interview with Mayor Scott Gillingham, who is in studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
So why don't we start with the trees? There's a question, actually. I have a clip of a student who was joined us recently on CBC. Her name is Riz Laburada, and she's in grade 10. She goes to Maples Collegiate. Her geography class actually sent you a letter saying that they need more trees, and they're hoping for more trees in their neighborhood.
We wanted to think of a brighter future for us because we're grade 10 students. We're in high school. All we're thinking about is our future. Trees are like a good way to guarantee a brighter and a cleaner future for us. I believe that it really does help with mental health because when I look at all the trees, I think, wow, it's so beautiful. Wow, it's so amazing. Wow, it's such a gift to have. This means something to a lot of people, and we want them to take into account to that because the mayor is supposed to represent us and look out for us, and we want them to know that this is important to us.
We promised we would bring the question to you in the next monthly interview. What do you say to the students?
I couldn't agree with the students more. In fact, when I campaigned for mayor back in 2022, I made a commitment to add more trees. And this year in our budget, we've added more money to preserve more trees and to plant more trees. And so, in fact, our budget for trees is going up 45% over the next few years. And so I'll make sure that I track down those students' letter to me later today. And one of the things we've also done is we're working to find ways to make it much easier for students and any community group to participate in volunteer planting. And so if any group in the community right now is listening to this or any school, please reach out to your local city council or reach out to my office, and we'll help you find a way to be part of a tree planting. Usually our city plants trees in the late spring, sometimes early June, and then another tree planting in fall. Those are the best times to plant trees, but the answer ultimately is yes, more trees is important, and we are investing in more trees.
So now this was obviously not planned, but it just happens to fall on the same day where the Free Press is reporting about a development in St. Norbert, a big housing project, and there's a group there concerned about trees, the Coalition to Save LeMay Forest, the Free Press is reporting. So they're concerned because there's 9,000 to 14,000 trees that could be involved in coming down there to make way for development. Now, I know that part of the discussion here is the need for housing. How do you balance a development that is going to meet housing needs, which we've talked about a lot right now, with concerns about taking down existing forest?
It is a very challenging balance, Marcy. You're exactly right. That particular development application will go before a committee on Monday, so I'm not going to speak to that development specifically. But it is always a balance, and that's why we want to make sure that even on the city's boulevards and in the city's parks, where our teams have to take down diseased trees, sometimes trees are struggling with Dutch elm disease. We want to make sure that we're replanting, not just replanting one, but replanting more than one. So we're moving towards a 2-to-1 ratio. For every tree we have to take down in the city, we want to plant 2 trees to replace it.
Time right now, 7:44. Mayor Scott Gillingham here for our regular monthly interview, which means we're going to talk about a whole bunch of topics. The next one actually is about the nonprofit groups that have come forward. Many of them, a lot of them that do work with inner city youth. They've told CBC that there's a planned cut, which there is, to community grant programs, but they're describing this as dangerous. So just to frame this for listeners, the city currently divides $3.4 million among a variety of groups through your annual community grant program. But I know in the recently adopted 4-year budget, that amount goes from $3.4 million to $1.3 million annually starting next year. Why is that necessary, that cut in your view?
Well, I think we need to set it in the bigger context. The city of Winnipeg gives out a total of $107 million in grants of all types, small grants, large grants. And so we need to understand as well that in 2014, we gave out $41 million in grants. We're now up to $107 million in grants. A couple of things have changed significantly since 2014. One, the city of Winnipeg was not really on the front lines of homelessness and housing. We have been drawn into that. We are now doing that. That used to be primarily provincial responsibility. We now give out grants to groups like the 24/7 Safe Spaces, where we never gave out grants before. So the pressure on the city's budget has only grown, and we are actually giving out more grants. Since that time as well, we now have a strategic plan that Council has. Council never had a strategic priorities action plan before. Now we have one. And so what we want to do is ensure that when we're looking at grants and reviewing grant applications, that they are seen through the lens of the city's priorities and city council priorities. And we didn't have a robust intake process before. That's really what this is about, is ultimately about establishing an intake process that is robust, and then the grant applications can be measured against the strategic plan of council.
So you and I have talked a lot about youth violence, youth crime. The stats came out this week. We've been discussing a lot of them. They've been on the rise, 30% rise in overall violent crime in Winnipeg for the last, not youth crime, but violent crime for the last 5 years. A lot of these inner city agencies that are worried about being cut are the ones that are sort of at the front lines and the grassroots of dealing with specifically a lot of young people, but also a lot of those needs in the most vulnerable populations. So people might not be able to square why now you would look at cutting the grants unless this is a political push to the province to say we can't do it financially anymore. You've got to step up and do it.
Well, in part, for sure, we need more assistance from from the province of Manitoba, and we've been talking about that, and we have good conversations right now with the Premier on that, and the Premier has committed to assisting municipalities, including the city of Winnipeg, with our funding allocations.
But are you looking for him to fill this gap? Because you were mentioning 24-hour safe space, saying before we didn't have to fund that. That was provincial. Is that what you're hoping will maybe come from this change that you're...
I'm hoping that some of the conversations that we're having with the province will assist the city of Winnipeg and make sure we're back into the lane that is our jurisdiction. That's going to take some time, but I think what's important as well is to understand that, yes, the overall envelope of the smaller community grant envelope of $3 million out of the $107 million we're looking at reducing that. No organizations have been cut at this time. No specific grants have been cut. We're now going to have an intake process, which we haven't had before, and ask organizations to apply through the intake process so that we can measure and review the grant applications against the strategic plan and that council has established. And that plan includes a priority in downtown. Our multi-year budget includes, for example, funding for the downtown YMCA to create programming for youth to combat against, the trends we're seeing in some of our youth crime. So there's a lot of work left to do, but you just have to understand. Everyone has to understand that the city only has so many funds, and we're responsible for certain areas of program delivery, and so we're trying to work in such a way that we can take a look at those grants and review them against our priorities.
I guess just last on this before we move to another topic here, I want to ask you how concerned people should be, because if you meet the threshold and you match the goals, then you may get the same level of funding. But if not, then and if the province or the privates don't step in, then that's at the heart of the fear. What happens to these organizations that are doing the vital work? Because the timing seems strange to sort of make that shift. Although I respect what you're saying about you have a plan now.
Yeah, and the timing. This has been part of our budget for the last several months, so it's been public. What I appreciate is one of the leaders of one of the organizations reached out to me yesterday. We have a good relationship. He called and he said, "Look, can we at least have a conversation? Maybe it's time to have a conversation between the city, our organizations, the province of Manitoba, and the private sector."
Is that happening?
Well, this is the first, request, and I thought it was a very good request, because let's sit down together and talk to, in these cases, to some of these potential other funders to see what we can do collectively.
To another topic here. Now, the city's top civil servant and CAO, Michael Jacka, has resigned. It did come less than a week after an audit of the city's workforce found a lack of processes for reviewing staff performance. Can you confirm if those two things were connected?
That would be a question for Michael Jack. I think there's no doubt that, the results of the workforce audit showed some things that were very concerning, and they showed areas that we really as a city need to improve upon. City of Winnipeg employees, and there's over 8,000 of them, need to have regular performance reviews. It's important for the city employee to know how they're doing against key priorities and key performance indicators. And if we don't have that, you can't measure how well an employee is doing. And you can't give good or critical feedback to an employee to see the improvement. Every City of Winnipeg employee and every elected official is in one business. We are in the business of serving the public. And so the people of Winnipeg pay taxes and fees, work hard for a living. They deserve excellent public service. And so the only way to ensure we're delivering excellent public service is to be measuring the performance of our staff.
And that's the CAO's responsibility to do
Ultimately, it's the CAO's responsibility.
So you said I would have to ask Michael Jack, but do you have any response to that at all, or are you leaving it at that?
I'll leave it at that. Mr. Jack and I had a conversation late in the week, last week, and I'll respect HR matters, and he resigned on Monday, and I accepted his resignation.
What happens next in filling that position, just to remind Winnipeggers where we're at right now?
So right now we have an acting CAO, Mayor Gillingham is serving, and I have nominated through motion Sherwood Armbruster, who's in our city clerk's department, to serve as the interim CAO. That has to go to council. That'll be on June the 27th. Council will vote on that, and assuming that Sherwood Armbruster becomes the interim CAO, he will serve in that role until we get a permanent CAO, and that process for a search has already started.
Speaking of searches, we're going to get some more information today around what's going on with the landfill search. Obviously, the province is leading a lot of that. However, I'm just curious what the role is of the city, and people might be wondering whether or not there's land that might need to be involved as the search continues, and what is the role of the city going to be?
The province is leading that. It's Prairie Green Landfill, which is outside of the city of Winnipeg. It's not in the city of Winnipeg. It's in another jurisdiction. We have said consistently, and I certainly maintain, that if called upon, our water waste staff, for example, will be willing to provide their expertise, and we're really, as you said, waiting to hear from the province. They're really leading that process, and so I haven't heard anything specific. There's been no specific request from the province of Manitoba at this time.
Let's move to grad season here before you go this morning. So we're going to switch gears entirely now. Time right now is 8 minutes to 8 o'clock. We're live with Mayor Scott Gillingham, who's been joining us. He's here every month for our regular interview. I want to take a second to remind you that if you have topics for the mayor, he's been very open to answering questions and such. So for future moments when we have him on, call our listener line 788-3205. Why don't you hold up what you've brought, Mr. Mayor Scott Gillingham? What is this?
I was asked to kind of bring along my grade 12 yearbook, and so I dug into my archives at home.
YouTube's going to get your picture up here.
Yes, there we go.
Look at this. There you are.
Many years ago.
Look at you. What school did you go to?
Carmen Collegiate. So to all of the grads in all of the high schools this year, congratulations. Sincerely, happy graduation. You've worked very, very hard.
What are we listening to?
Oh, this is the one and only Joe Cocker, On the Edge of a Dream, and this was our grad song.
When you think about graduation, I know obviously you just shared wishes with everyone. Did you land where you thought? Was young Scott Gillingham in the photo that we're looking at on YouTube? Were you going to be mayor one day?
No, that was not on my radar. Look, Marcy, I grew up outside of Winnipeg, on a farm west of Carmen. I did not have aspirations at 18 years of age to be the mayor of Winnipeg, but I'm really humbled and honored to be in the role.
How are you going to keep grads here in Winnipeg? What's your pitch for why they should stay in our city?
Why they should stay in our city?
Yeah.
Well, grad is a memorable time. Every one of us that has graduated from high schools remembers our grade 12 graduation. And a lot of us still stay in touch. In fact, I still stay in touch with a lot of my classmates. A bunch of us are going golfing on a Saturday coming up soon. And you make memories in high school, and grade 12 graduation is one of the most memorable moments in anyone's life. I
think actually that's a pitch that we don't make enough sometimes, those connections that can last. Maybe because it's cold here, we stay in touch with people for a long time.
Could be.
Thank you very much for this morning, and happy grad season to everyone out there, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thanks, Marcy.
That is Scott Gillingham, the mayor of the city of Winnipeg, talking about all kinds of matters this morning. We're going to let his grad song, Joe Cocker, take us to news time and headlines. This is Edge of a Dream. Classic 1986, the mayor's grad song. Joe Cocker and the Edge of a Dream. He was leaving the studio, Scott Gillingham, asking what mine was. Mine was Tom Cochrane. Life is a Highway, 1992. He's going to be coming back to Winnipeg, actually, this summer to play the Burt Block Party. If you want to get out and check some classic music. It is 3 minutes to 8 o'clock now on CBC, 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or YouTube. And we have a sunny sky in downtown Winnipeg. The forecast details in just a moment. Heather Wells is in first with headlines.
Good morning. Well, a Point Douglas man calls it garbage upon garbage. Marshall Weave lives across the back lane from a Main Street property that burned 16 months ago. What was surplus direct is still a pile of rubble, and he says people are now dumping their garbage on top of that pile. Weave says if this happened in any other part of Winnipeg, a place like Sage Creek or White Ridge, it would have been cleaned up long ago. A Winnipeg lawsuit seeks billions of dollars for a failed plan to manufacture COVID-19 vaccine in Manitoba. We'll hear the details in our next local news at 8:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
It is 15 in Winnipeg. It's mostly sunny downtown. The high today, 25. Now, we do have a 60% chance we'll see showers this afternoon in the city with a risk of a thunderstorm. 788-3093 is the traffic line if you need us. Traffic's actually been quiet this morning, but let us know if you have a problem. A reminder, the Louise Bridge, that's a big one. It is closed until June 28th. So call the traffic line if you see other problems, 788-3093. Well, coming up on Information Radio, we are going to be talking more about crime statistics that came out this week. There's lots of them to dig through. One of the big headlines, as we've been telling you, is an increase in youth violence in the city. We have a criminal justice professor on this morning to look at the bigger picture about what he says might be behind this and where to go from here. So stay tuned for that. Yesterday, we were talking to some grassroots organizations about it. And now that we've been looking at establishing the issues, where do we go? So stay tuned. That's after 8 o'clock. Also after 8 o'clock on Information Radio, more of your calls about the first day of summer, or rather on this first day of summer, about your best summer memories. And if you want to get one in now, we'll get your voice on after 8. Love to hear from you. So pick up the phone or pull it out of your pocket if you're on the move already this morning, and give us a call and share. We'll get your calls on after 8 as well. 788-3205. 788-3205 is the listener line. I'm Marcy Marcusa with Dylan and Brad and Corey and Abby behind the glass. It's a full house over there. Thank you for listening. We're coming up to the top of the clock. 1 minute to 8. World Report's next. Stay right here.
on Q with Tom Power.
In order for Lily Gladstone to make the film Fancy Dance, she had to learn the Cayuga language, which is spoken fluently by only 21 people. She'll be here to tell you about the power of creating a world where everybody, young and old, speaks the language fluently.
Performance is such a beautiful tool to integrate into language revitalization.
That's coming up on Q, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current with Matt Galloway.
The swimmer Maggie McNeil is looking to defend her Olympic gold in Paris. Could be her last games, and she's dealing with asthma brought on by chlorine. But she thinks her chances are good. Maggie McNeil, coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. An out-of-control wildfire, a late-night evacuation order, and harrowing drive to safety. It has been a long night for the people of Churchill Falls. They had to leave home at a moment's notice as flames approached the town. Terry Griffin is one of them.
So I had a bag that was ready to go type of thing, and I just grabbed the bag and off we went. It was that fast. Get your things together and get moving.
The CBC's Peter Cowan is tracking developments.
The fire has been burning for days just west of Churchill Falls, but last night officials were worried. Strong winds pushed the flames to within just a few kilometers of the town, and it was growing fast. So they gave the order to leave town. More than 700 people were forced to load up whatever they could in just a few minutes and drive east 3 hours to Happy Valley Goose Bay. 12-year-old Elizabeth Power was worried.
I was shaking when we had, she said to go pack, and I was shaking. I was like, what's gonna happen? I'm still scared.
Churchill Falls is a company town run by Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. A small team has stayed behind to keep the massive hydroelectric plant running and keep the lights on, not just in Labrador, but also in Quebec. The power plant provides about 15% of that province's power. There's only one highway in and out of town, so a long line of cars snake their way towards Happy Valley Goose Bay. That's where the local YMCA gym quickly became the center to greet people like Susan Chislett. She says it was hard to leave.
We've created a home. My husband said coming down, we're driving away from everything we ever worked for. And I said, yeah, but we're here, so we can always rebuild if we need to.
People in Happy Valley Goose Bay have offered bedrooms and empty cabins to people arriving, and the military base is also taking in evacuees. Back in Churchill Falls, water bombers will continue to do what they can to keep the fire away from town. Everyone just hopes the hot temperatures and strong thunderstorms that rolled through last night won't make it worse. Peter Cowan, CBC News, St. John's.
Nearly 2 million Muslims will reach the end of the Hajj pilgrimage this week, but the heat is extreme. The faithful are walking to Mecca in 43-degree heat today. And the news service Reuters reports more than 550 people have died since the Hajj began on Friday. Fahad Saeed is a climate scientist.
We need to prepare, we need to adapt, while realizing that it will compromise on the centuries-old ritual, but still we need to save people. But at the same time, we must do climate action to stop the global warming at 1.5 degrees centigrade. Anything beyond that, we are putting those pilgrims at the risk of death.
The timing of the Hajj is set by the lunar calendar right now. Its start date is moving closer to winter, but by the 2040s, it will coincide with peak summer in Saudi Arabia. Canada claims to be a climate leader, but advocates say it could be doing more as a major oil and gas producer. An independent analysis reveals the industry's exports could potentially produce more emissions than all of Canada. Jayla Bernstein has that story.
Why would Canadians trust you?
A testy exchange earlier this month at a parliamentary committee on sustainable development and the environment. NDP MP Laurel Collins questioned Cenovus oil and gas CEO John McKenzie.
All our emissions actually peaked in 2017, down to
emissions in the oil and gas sector have continued to rise year after year.
According to the federal government, oil and gas emissions are up more than 80% since 1990. And that's only domestic emissions from activities like drilling and refinement. Canada and other major producers don't count emissions from exported oil and gas. But the international research project Climate Action Tracker does. It estimates Canada's oil and gas exports may increasingly outweigh its domestic emissions. If all of Canada's oil and gas exports were burned in 2022, they would have produced more than 900 megatons of carbon dioxide. That's more than the entire country's emissions that year, and more than 4 times the emissions reported for the oil and gas sector. The true scope of exported emissions could be higher or lower, depending on the final use of those products.
We're in a closed system.
Jessica Kelly is a senior policy advisor in Winnipeg with the International Institute for Sustainable Development.
You can't play a shell game with emissions. The climate knows the score.
The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers said in an email that progress on emissions is a core priority. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
In Sweden, a former Syrian army general accused of war crimes has been acquitted. Brigadier General Mohammed Hamo now lives in Sweden. He was accused of aiding and abetting war crimes against international law. Swedish prosecutors allege Hamo facilitated attacks on military and civilian targets in 2012. This case marked the first time a senior Syrian military figure faced trial in a European court for human rights violations. He was acquitted this morning. It is not clear how many Ukrainian soldiers have been killed or wounded since Russia launched its full-scale invasion, but the number is in the tens of thousands. CBC News got exclusive access to a medical evacuation team treating wounded soldiers. As Briar Stewart tells us, some of the wounded were conscripted by law, and they only lasted a few days on the front line.
One by one, the soldiers arrive bloodied and bandaged. Some are brought on stretchers to a pickup point in southeastern Ukraine, like a 39-year-old who tells us his military call sign is Wi-Fi. He was an IT specialist before he was conscripted, after Ukraine passed its new mobilization law in April. He was only on the front for 2 days when he came under fire by Russian artillery, shrapnel piercing both of his legs. How difficult was it for you to leave the trench and to get evacuated?
Very difficult.
He said the tourniquets on his limbs made it hard for him to crawl out of the trench. He had to be carried out to a vehicle and then transferred to this medical evacuation bus along with 25 other men. The bus, which transfers the soldiers to the hospital, is run by a volunteer group called Hospitalers. One of the combat medics, who goes by the call sign Rudy, says soldiers are often desperate to hear whether they will need their limbs amputated. On this day, she says one wanted to call his family. Like others CBC News spoke with, he was a brand new soldier. He was mobilized and only lasted on the front line for a few days before being seriously injured. Briar Stewart, CBC News, southeastern Ukraine.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will publicly apologize to First Nations children and their families for the discrimination they faced from the federal government's child welfare policies. The official apology would fulfill one of the government's commitments in a recently finalized $23 billion settlement agreement. The settlement will compensate First Nations people who experienced racial discrimination through Ottawa's chronic underfunding of on-reserve family services. There are plenty of reports of hybrid bears in the Northwest Territories. Some people call them growler bears, others call them pizzlies. And although the reports are common, these hybrid bears are actually quite rare. The CBC's Leanie Lamberink takes us through the latest research.
For whatever reason, she seemed to like grizzly bears.
Steve Barlick is a wildlife manager for the government of the Northwest Territories. He's talking about a female polar bear who mated with 2 grizzlies and mothered 4 hybrid cubs.
And then those grizzly bears mated with the offspring, and kind of that's how we ended up with some of the second generation hybrid bears.
Evan Richardson, a polar bear scientist with the federal government, saw them during a monitoring flight 10 years ago.
When we turned that corner into that bay and saw this kind of creamy colored polar bear with 3 little chocolate
cubs. You almost had to like rub your eyes.
Scientists have known since 2017 8 hybrid bears in the Western Arctic belonged to the same family. What they didn't know was how rare they are.
I would have expected there to be more.
Ruth Rivkin, a University of Manitoba researcher, helped develop a new genetic sequencing chip to identify hybrid bears. Scientists used it on samples from more than 800 bears in Canada, Alaska, and Greenland. The only hybrids they found, that same family of bears in the NWT.
What that means is that hybridization is quite rare.
Rivkin says the Western Arctic is where hybridization is most likely to happen. It's one of the few places in the world where grizzly and polar bear habitats are starting to overlap due to climate change. She expects there will be more hybrids in the future. Minnie Lambrink, CBC News, Yellowknife.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime at cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
What are you most excited about and looking forward to for summer?
I'm looking forward to going to Norway maybe, and I could get to meet my cousins for the first time.
I'm going to go to France.
I'm looking forward to go to North Dakota with my family.
What else do you like about summer?
Just staying at home. I'm gonna go to the beach.
Sunniest beach.
We get to play games, and I also plan to go to the beach 2 times.
Good morning. We are students from Sister McNamara School.
Happy summer from CBC!
Happy summer indeed! Welcome everyone. This is the first day of summer. Officially arrives this afternoon, and we got some help welcoming it this morning from the grade 4 and 5 students, as you heard from Sister McNamara School here in downtown Winnipeg. That was Irvin, Saran, Evan, Kamaya, Heaven, and Ricardo. Thank you guys for doing my job for me this morning. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio. You might be listening on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app, or watching on YouTube. Great to have you along. Well, not bad for the start to the day. The first day of summer. Lots of sunshine downtown. Abby's in with the forecast in a moment. Just serious matters this half hour. We're going to continue digging through the Winnipeg Police crime stats. Stay tuned. I'll tell you our focus in a moment. In studio live with us, we're going to have a criminal justice professor this half hour talking about why there might be an increase in youth violent crimes. So yesterday we heard more about the grassroots of working with young people. Today we're going to take a sort of a wider look at why some of this activity might be happening in our community. So stay tuned for that. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells with news headlines.
Good morning. Well, Manitoba's largest First Nation is concerned apartment and condo buildings going up at the Forks could damage archaeological evidence at the historic site. Mike Sutherland at Peguis First Nation wants Peguis and others included in a formal consultation process. And it is being called a uniquely Manitoban merger. Assiniboine Credit Union, Case Financial Group, and Westoba Credit Union, all three will form one, creating one of the largest credit unions in Manitoba and will be in the top 10 in Canada. I'll be back with more Manitoba news at 8:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, let's get into what's happening in this forecast. Abby has, as mentioned, more details on the day. Hello.
Hello, Marcy. We've jumped to 17 in the downtown with, the sun making its presence felt outside through those cloudy conditions we were seeing earlier. We will see clearing throughout the morning. The high for today will touch 20, though still a little cool, right, as we speak. Expect a mix in sun and cloud for the rest of the day. There's a 60% chance of showers in the afternoon. A risk of thunderstorm to come with that. It will be light and breezy from the south, and we'll get to that high of 25, which actually, some people say it feels like 26 outside. Tonight, partly cloudy skies, a chance of early evening showers, risk of thunderstorm also coming. Brandon at 14 and cloudy, Thompson at 11, mix of sun and cloud. Dauphin, Gimli, Steinbach, Morris all sitting at 16 with sunny spells. But right now in Winnipeg, we are at 17 degrees.
Thanks, Abby.
You're welcome.
Corey, what do we know about the commute?
I knew it's been a very quiet commute overall so far. Nothing major to
to report. But if you do see something going on, if you're walking, biking, driving, you see something, give me a call, 204-788-3093.
Well, it is no secret that youth crime is on the rise. And youth violent crime is also on the rise here in Winnipeg. That was part of the headline in a new report about the 2023 stats by the Winnipeg Police Service, came out earlier this week. Now, violent youth crimes went up 15.9% year over year and 43.4%. That's a big number over the 5-year average. Vincent Lilly is an outreach worker with the Downtown Community Partnership. He's also author of All Eyes on Me, which chronicles his life of addiction, recovery, and hope. He was in conversation with Faith Flundell yesterday on Up to Speed about why youth are getting into these situations.
We all have trauma that we go through in different degrees. But the thing is that when you have these kids who go through trauma, I was one of those kids. I went through a lot of trauma when I was younger, and I didn't have any outlets. I didn't have anything there to help me to exercise in any other way. When it comes to these youth, all they're doing is their behavior is almost normal, because, like, in my opinion, we're all just acting normally to an abnormal circumstance. So when it comes to these situations that these kids are faced with, they're acting because the way that they're raised in their environments, they weren't taught very well, and they were also, like I said, traumatized in their environments and being raised, and so they're acting out. And when you say acting out, kids are acting out. They're trying to tell you something. They don't like what they're doing. They're not happy about the things that they're doing. They're trying to tell you. There's this cry for help.
Now, if I mentioned yesterday, we talked to also one of the people that's on the front lines of helping, Kent Duick. He's the founder of Inner City Youth Alive, which is a Christian-based center in Winnipeg. He's been working with at-risk teens for nearly 40 years. Now, he made it clear, this is his language, that he's not about locking people up, kids up, and throwing away the key. But he does have concerns about repeat offenders.
If you're going to, if you just think about it, you have an individual who is given to violence, and they commit that act, and they say to police, which they always do. This is what I hear from the police. The most common phrase is, "I'll be out before you're off shift." So there's zero consequence for the crime they commit. They're out again. So there's been nothing saying, I shouldn't do this again. There's no deterrent, nothing that sort of breaks the cycle.
Kent went on to talk about resources in community, or what happens after somebody comes out of incarceration, and what happens for young people. Well, Michael Weinrath is here to help us move the conversation forward. Michael is a criminal justice professor at the University of Winnipeg. Good morning.
Good morning.
Lots to think about there. I know I've put it all out there for you. Let's start with what you heard from Vincent about what he was talking about around, why some youth are getting involved in violent crime. What's your thought on that as you were listening?
Yeah, I think that, historically, when we look at kids who join gangs, who engage in, really violent behavior, they tend to come from, fairly difficult family backgrounds. It might be kids in care or had been in care. One of the things I wanted to mention, right, is that one of the reasons you see these repeat offenses and sometimes more serious violence, right, is these subcultural influences. And it doesn't always have to be a gang, but it can be just a group who just reinforce each other and, sometimes egg each other on. And we've seen that before. Right. So if we look in Winnipeg over the last 20 years, when we've had epidemics of certain types of crime, we see these sort of subcultural, groups of kids that these things sort of ensue. So if you look at a lot of the fires in the early 2000s, right, a lot of them were set by kids, and they talk to each other and go out and perform these acts. Then we had auto theft, where we had, again, groups of kids, who reveled in performing these sorts of things. However, in both those cases, there was a task force struck with respect to the arson. There was the Winnipeg Auto Theft Suppression Strategy for auto theft, so that you can actually initiate these sort of interventions and actually end up reducing these things. Now, when we look at that, though, you have a combination of things. You have services that are being, provided, education to kids, but you also have accountability, right? You have more stringent supervision. And not of everyone, right? We still have a lot of youth who get moved through diversion, restorative justice programs, and I tip my cap to the police and social service agencies involved in those sorts of things. But you also need some form of suppression consequences as well.
Is there a connection? You're talking about past waves of things, and I've lived in the city through a lot of those things in watching as you're nodding correctly to the auto theft and what happened there, and to other waves of the arson wave we had. But is there a connection? Do you think, like youth crime being on the rise and distrust of police being on the rise? Because you nodded to task force, task force that can help. But how much is that strained relationship part of also maybe what we also might be seeing in Winnipeg, or not, in your view?
Well, I mean, I think that when you have, hardcore youth offenders, I mean, they're never going to be really favorable towards the police. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily see that connection. Certainly, there seems to be more angst generally in terms of the crime rise. We have a lot of poverty. And again, we seem to have this sort of, just sort of this general unrest coming out of COVID, right? And it's not just Winnipeg, of course. We've seen that in other areas. And so, perhaps the distrust of police is part of that. But I wouldn't necessarily make that connection with youth crime.
Why do you think, when we look at the youngest set, there were stats in this report about children 12 and under being involved in crimes? Why do you think that that age group is getting more involved?
Yeah, well, again, I think you have, this core of, really hardcore repeat offenders. And often when you look at the really young kids, they know older kids. They have siblings, neighbors who know that they're not going to be subject to arrest and will encourage them to get involved in these things. And again, as the first clip, the young fellow talked about, a lot of these kids come from traumatized backgrounds. They're not supervised very carefully, by their parents or whatever situation they're in. And so, the older kids, encourage them to act out, and they do. And again, there are programs, Turnabout. There are social service agencies who can intervene in those situations too.
How do we address underlying issues that we're talking about, Michael, like poverty and addictions, without over-policing the youth that we're trying to help?
Yeah, well, again, I think unfortunately, right, a lot of these things are sort of long-term investments. And so I think it's important that the province continue to invest in these things, and the city support those things where they can. And so in terms of over-policing, I think, again, you want to target the prolific and really high-risk individuals, and they're trying to do that, I guess, with a program that they've rolled out recently. But again, you sometimes you have to accept the fact that, some kids, it's difficult to reach them. And I know I started this business, over 40 years ago, and, you'd have, kids in these youth homes, and they'd be fine, and then they'd get in contact with their old peers, and suddenly they'd be back involved again. So you do need to focus some attention on the high risk. But yeah, let's stay the course. Use restorative justice diversion where you can. And yeah, let's hope that the province and city keep working on housing, addiction, mental health services. All those things are important too.
And we're talking about systems, right? Like, it's not so much the kids in care, all, like, you mentioned kids in care and you mentioned youth homes, and it's those spaces. Then it behooves us, doesn't it, as a society, to improve also those systems and spaces to surround the kids in those places with people that will help them. Does it not behoove us to do that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned children in care. And so as always, when you discuss these things, I would like to mention most kids in care are, doing the best they can and managing. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of dedicated people who work with them. Unfortunately, you create this sort of at-risk group. And so, again, even if it's only, 5 or 6%, they can end up in difficult circumstances. So again, I thought Mitch Bourbonnais, talked about the importance of mentors. So for those of you out there who have an interest, certainly reaching out to different organizations and spending time with young people and providing, the young males and females a chance to bond and support them. I think those things are important for people who'd like to get involved in that.
You nodded a little bit to government involvement, talking about the provincial and the civic levels. But specifically, what could the government be doing to address the problem before it gets worse? Is it a task force in this day and age, or are we looking at something else?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think forces can be useful in the sense that they make systems work together. Sometimes systems get competitive, or people say it's your job, not my job. Whereas when you get a task force with the right leadership, you can then engage the different agencies, clarify the lines of responsibility, and get people working together. And certainly the fire department, working with police and other agencies back in the early 2000s, the Winnipeg auto theft suppression with MPI funding and police and corrections working together. Those were very successful. And so, a task force in this particular instance, the police have started a program, but again, it might benefit from more resources and some specific goals and strategies that are supported by other agencies.
Appreciate you coming in this morning. Thank you very much for your time.
Yep. Thanks, Marcy.
That's Michael Weinrath, criminal justice professor at the University of Winnipeg. If you want to read the stories about the police stats report that came out this week, and embedded in our stories is the full report, so you can look at it and respond. It is on our website at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Friday is National Indigenous Peoples Day, a day to showcase the richness and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultural expressions and stories. Do you have a story you'd like to share? We'd love to hear it. Author and University of Manitoba Indigenous Knowledge Professor Niigaan Sinclair will be our special guest. Call our listener line now and leave us a message sharing your story at 204-788-3797.
All right, people, I don't want to hear any of this after this, the days get shorter stuff. I just want to live in today, the long day, the summer day, the first day of the new season. It arrives at 10 to 4 this afternoon. You're sharing on the listener line your best summer memories.
Hi, Marcy. It's Barb Froman calling from up in Dauphin. Some of my best summer memories involve summers in BC at my grandparents' place in Ladsville, where my cousins and I would absolutely run wild, climbing trees and playing in the ocean and playing in the creek, and just absolutely carefree, or berrying for my grandmother. And other good summer memories are summer at Steep Rock, where my mom woke me up in the middle of the night, my sister and I, so we could see the northern lights for the very first time. And I have since gone on to try and photograph the northern lights, sometimes successfully, mostly not, but still lots of fun. Bye.
Thank you so much for calling the listener line with summer memories. I love hearing about all of your different perspectives, and sometimes it's the simple things, right? It's the smell, it's the feel of heat on your skin. But we are about to talk about summer from a different perspective, because it can actually be a really dangerous season for your pets. Now, I own bulldogs, and those guys pant when it's 21 outside, so I get it. That is part of the topic today on Radio Noon's Call-In Conversation. Janet's off today, but the lovely Laurie Hook-Stratton's in studio. Hello.
Hello, lovely Marcy Marcusa.
How you doing?
I'm doing well, and you?
Good. I'm good. First day of summer.
Yeah.
You're talking about pet concerns. It's not just about heat, though, right?
No, it's blastomycosis, which is can be a threat to our pets, and we'll find out how all that works and what to do to prevent it, as well as the effect of heat on pets. In fact, anything to do with summer and pets, we want to talk about. Wood ticks, for example. We've talked about that before, but the ticks are legion. So if you have a pet tick, it's a good summer, for your collection.
Have lots of friends.
Yeah. So that's going to be from 12:30. Well, but it's 12:37, I think, when we actually hit the call-in show. And we want people to tell us what their concerns are, and Dr. Watson will be able to help.
All right. Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you.
So Dr. Jonas Watson is the guest today on the Radio Noon Call-In Conversation, 12:37 to the top of the clock, 1 o'clock, if you can join them live. You can also leave a message right now with your questions or comments, concerns about everything to do with your pets in summertime. So the listener line for Radio Noon is 788-3797, and you can see that up on the screen right now if you're watching us on YouTube. Well, time to slide in a little bit of music before the news. I actually love this tune, so I'm glad about it. This is Garrett Niles, an End of an Era.
Another scotch on a dark night,
Another dance with a cigarette. Another feeling that I can't fight. Holding hands with my regret. Same bed, same heartbreak, same damn mistakes. But I'm done thinking this is gonna kill me. I'll be okay. It's the end of an era. The end of everything I've known. It's the end of a battle. It's been going on too long. The end of the fear, the shame, the whole damn game starts tonight. It's the end of an era. The end of an era. Sleepwalking on a tightrope, trying to hold on to it all. Tripping over my demons, no one there to break my fall. Well, I fell, I woke up, and I'm still here. I'm only feeling sorry for myself now. I'm seeing clear, it's the end of an era. The end of everything I've known. It's the end of a battle. It's been going on too long. The end of the fear, the shame, the whole damn game starts tonight. It's the end of an era. The end of an era. I bottled up my feelings like I didn't need them. But I was wrong. It's time to break open, say the unspoken. I'm feeling strong. I bottled up my feelings like I didn't need them. But I was wrong. It's time to break open, say the
Wow.
unspoken.
Big tune for a big day. It's the end of spring. It's the beginning of summer. That's big time summer songs right there. If you're watching on YouTube, Abby and I even got out our phones and did a little bit of raising the phone flashlight over our heads. We're listening to Garrett Nealis, End of an Era. That's Winnipeg rocker. If you want to check it out and support local music on your own streams. So you are listening to Information Radio. I'm Marcy Marcusa. The news is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg at 8:30. Beautiful sunshine out there, and it is warming up. We're at 17 degrees right now in downtown Winnipeg. We're headed to 25 today. Gorgeous temperature for the first day of summer. But once again, we have a good chance of showers this afternoon, maybe even a thunderstorm. A pile of rubble where a Main Street business once stood has become a headache for people in Point Douglas. Marshall Wiebe lives behind the former Surplus Direct store, which was demolished after a fire in February of last year. He thinks the mess would have been dealt with by now in other parts of the city.
We just want it cleaned up because I just feel that if this was in Sage Creek or White Ridge or any other area of the city, this wouldn't have lasted for even 24 hours, never mind 16 months.
Wiebe says he doesn't know who should be responsible for cleaning up the mess. The cleanup's been delayed while the property owner fights a provincial order to stop work over asbestos. Manitoba's largest First Nation is concerned a housing development planned for the Forks is not adequately consulting with them. Peguis First Nation also believes the project could compromise archaeological evidence and belongings of cultural and spiritual significance at that site. CBC's Rosanna Hempel reports.
The Forks is expected to break ground on 10 apartment and condo buildings late this summer. Mike Sutherland is the Director of Consultation and Special Projects with Peguis First Nation. He says they met with the Forks in May about their concerns, but he says it's unclear how or whether they'll be formally accommodated and consulted.
But let's do this right, because if they unearth ancestors' artifacts, we want to be there to monitor that and make sure they're not damaged.
The Forks says it's hosted public consultations on the project over the last decade. They also commissioned an investigation into the housing site in 2017. It recovered few animal remains and artifacts. A spokesperson says the buildings won't have basements or underground parkades to preserve any archaeological evidence. The Forks says it's glad Peguis has come forward and that their conversations are ongoing. Rosanna Hempel, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg's mayor says he understands concerns of community groups worried about upcoming budget cuts. The city says it's reducing community grants from $3.4 million to $1.3 million starting next year. A number of community groups say they're on the front lines dealing with vulnerable people, and the reduction in funding will be devastating. Mayor Scott Gillingham says they had to make the change because the city can't fund everything. He says he has spoken to some of the groups.
Leaders of one of the organizations reached out to me yesterday. We have a good relationship. He called and he said, look, can we at least have a conversation? Maybe it's time to have a conversation between the city, our organizations, the province of Manitoba, and the private sector.
Gillingham says he is open to pulling together such a meeting to ensure programs can continue. A lawsuit is seeking billions of dollars for a failed plan to manufacture COVID-19 vaccine in Manitoba during the pandemic. Details from CBC's Vera Lynn Kubanek.
Alberta vaccine company Providence Therapeutics had a plan to produce tens of millions of doses of its COVID-19 vaccine in Manitoba. Former Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister announced in the depth of the pandemic the province would buy 2 million doses of the vaccine from Providence. In January 2021, Providence turned to an American company, Emergent Biosolutions, for commercial vaccine production at its Winnipeg facility. But the plan failed to proceed. Now Providence is suing Emergent Biosolutions for more than $3 billion. The lawsuit filed in a Winnipeg court this month alleges Emergent's Winnipeg facility could not produce the commercial volumes of the Providence COVID-19 vaccine. It alleges Emergent did not have reliable manufacturing capabilities and lacked capacity and equipment. Employees of Emergent were not properly trained, the lawsuit alleges, and there were not enough employees to carry out the work 24 hours a day. The allegations have not been tested in court, and both Providence and Emergent declined comment. Vera Lynn Kubanek, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Well, it is, as we've been talking about, the first day of summer, but compared to the rest of Canada, we're just not feeling it, but we will. Dave Phillips, senior climatologist at Environment and Climate Change Canada, says summer is just taking its time to get to Manitoba.
They're saying it's going to be a warmer than normal summer in Manitoba, really across the west. But it's probably not going to come till about the middle of July.
And Phillips says all the rain we've had should improve the forest fire situation over the summer. You can find more news updated throughout the day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
All right, let's finish up with Corey Funk here.
Yeah, pretty quiet commute overall, but if you do see something going on, I guess I'll be back tomorrow. 204-788-3093 is the number to call. Write it down.
All morning, you didn't get to share your summer memory.
Oh, gosh. You know what? It was one summer I got to hike the West Coast Trail with a bunch of friends.
Ooh.
And you're hiking, you just look to your left, you see whales.
Amazing.
Look to your right, you just see beautiful trees and whatever animals emerge from the forest. It was just the best.
I love that. Corey used to live on the East Coast, so saw lots of whales, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Lots of whales. Love them.
Beautiful. Abby?
Across the province, we are seeing beautiful sunny conditions. 17 currently in Winnipeg. We're expecting showers and thunderstorm later. Heading to a high of 25. Up north, Thompson and Churchill, kind of sunny and partly cloudy. We're going to see highs of 20s around that area. And for the rest of the southern part of the province, we're seeing highs between 23 and 25.
Thanks to our team of associate producers, our leaders in unit, Ellie Gonzalez and Leif Larson, as well as Donna Carrero filling in this week. And take care, be well. Thank you for listening, Manitoba. Talk to you again tomorrow.